Listen, I hope you beat TSM for the lols. Like it'll help my show if you can do that for me. But
I think TSM.
Is there a subreddit that is more less than TSM's? I don't think there is.
more toxic, did you say? Because it cut out a second.
More
Did you say
fun.
More fun.
More fun. I do love the way they just veer from one extreme conclusion to the other. That's why I liked it when Best of One came back, because now they just it's like driving them neurotic, if anything. Every week they can't decide do they hate Bjergsen or is he the savior? They don't know.
I think it was no.
On the new episode of Bjergsen and the gang. Like,
The best is
I'm trying to make the CLG subreddit as bad. Like, so it starts out so like TSM's the best because they have hope, and then they're like dead inside after they lose. And CLG
fans are nihilists,
no
mate. Yeah, of course.
They were just like,
of course, yeah.
So I'm going in and I'm like, every week I'm like feeding them hope. So now it's like when we win, they're like, oh, and when we lose, it's dramatic.
Because you know, even when CLG used to win, the fans would be like, well, we'll probably just fuck it up next week anyway.
We're just gonna get relegated anyway.
It was insane, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I love.
I'm trying to breed them into like TSM fans in a way.
I love how much CLG fans love talking about the past, even more so than TSM fans. They talk about the good things about the past and the bad things about the past.
I have a horrible story. You guys are gonna. I'm gonna throw my players under the bus here. Sorry, guys, but I just have to tell the story. It was so funny. I come in my first week in CLG, and like, I know that they've had this horrible season, right, and that they don't have a lot to live for, and like, the players. Including PoE, so this is kind of like shade at him too because it's so funny. But like they literally like they're getting to know each other. There's a team, you know, and they're talking to, and they're like they spend like a couple hours every night just like showing and going over their best plays. Like they're back in like 2015. They're like, oh yeah, here and this, and then PoE's like looking at his world spots, and I was like, they have so little to live for that they're like going back to their best ofs from 2 years ago, and I'm just like, oh, I feel so bad for them. I hope we win so that they have more to live for in the present.
Isn't that tragic?
Sorry, guys.
Loco?
It's so tragic.
Isn't that tragic? Guys. Someone just stuck in the past, reliving the glory days over and over again, recounting what they did 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Never got anything in the present to sort of brag about. It's tragic, isn't it? Let's agree, Loco. Let's make a blood brother bond to never be like that ever.
Doran, I agree with you, and also let's make sure when we grow old, we won't be petty. We won't be in our mid-30s.
No.
Like being petty and like arguing with teenagers, arguing with early 20-year-olds.
Wouldn't do that.
And being like angsty and like just mad at the world, and then you try your best to get at it.
I've always said this. Like, I'm actually an alright guy. I just play an arsehole on the internet.
Sometimes when you play a character too much, you know, like you get too much into the acting and you enjoy part of that acting, a part of being that character for that moment, and then you go to your regular life and you realize like you were just too good at acting, and that character, that part of that character became you.
Sure. Well, to be fair, you're not very good at acting at all, so.
I fell for that problem. Luckily, I'm married to somebody who's able to be like, hey, you need to like chill out a little bit. So. That
definitely helps, having someone who can ground you a little bit.
Yeah.
Right, this is going to be episode 30 times 3 of Listen Loco with me and Loco, the guy who listens to Loco and tells Loco to listen to him, as we've explicated many times on this show. Guest for this episode, Weldon Green, aka Mind Games Weldon. Do you actually still use Mind Games Weldon as the name?
I think it's CLG Weldon now, I guess.
Okay. Because it was actually a pretty good alias, because I've
still got the company, and I want to do like its own thing now.
Mind Games.
So yeah, I still want to use it as the website and the Mindfulness app and stuff like that. But
the thing is, it's actually a pretty good name if you think about it. Because the thing is, for people, a lot of people when you actually came into esports actually had never even heard of sports psychology. Like maybe they vaguely knew. Well, funnily enough, they might have known the concept vaguely in sports, but they never thought it could apply to esports pretty much. And so, if you actually called yourself like sports psychology welders, that doesn't really have a greater ring. Whereas like Mind Games is a term already in esports. In fact, funnily enough, it's actually a very Korean term. Like they love that term over there for any kind of like gamesmanship and stuff, you know. Was that actually part of why you picked the name?
Yeah, it took me probably a year to actually get it. I think I started blogging in 2012 on esport psychology, and then was just trying to think of a name for what I was going to do for the consulting brand for like a year and a half. And then then finally landed on Mind Games. And then the only reason it actually happened was because that URL was still open. under .gg because it was totally locked up under like .com or .net or whatever. But .gg was open, so I got saved.
Okay. Right. What about this then? I have a question for you that I don't think anyone's ever asked you. I've seen like quite a lot of interviews with you over the years, which is if you actually look, like you said, you actually came into esports. Like I remember the first time I think it was in like season 5 or something when you were working with CLG. Was that the first time? I think it was season 5, 2015.
2015, yeah.
Right. And at that time,
2014, I guess, with Enemy Esports.
Right, okay. But at that this is when I became aware of you anyway. At that time, I noticed in a lot of your early stuff then, you just kind of like stuck to the message, as it were. You stuck to the angle of like, I'm here to do sports psychology stuff, and you branched out maybe with some comment on coaching, etc. But I noticed in the first year or so, you didn't really make any sort of, I wouldn't say controversial because it's a very loaded term, I actually think, but like you didn't really say any sort of comments that like leapt off the page to themselves. You know, people were interested in your thing, and they were reading an email, they watched your videos, they were interested. But the reason why I want to ask you this is I've noticed over the years that like you basically, one of the reasons why I think people have such a visceral reaction to you is, to some degree, you clearly play up saying things that are added mildly incendiary. Like you take something that obviously you think is the case, but you make sure you pick the right team to mention in it. Or for example, I remember there was one time where you said that that you didn't actually, like as a coach of a Western team, you hadn't observed a gap between like Korea and the West. So like, here's the thing, like we could probably have a great discussion about that. I'm sure there's some truth to it, you know. But if you just say that in its own, it is going to be something which alone will get way further than necessarily the piece itself, right? So was this something you consciously changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, I started off learning how to do content marketing, and then I got better and better at marketing. So, you know, going along with that is like saying statements that are very true, but like, you know, obviously you have to say them exactly the right way.
Sure.
And then it I noticed, you know, my YouTube videos trend up when I choose the correct title, and that's just the way of the internet content world, I would say.
Damn.
It's actually a famous thing, you know. In fact, we've had a discussion on this very briefly in the past with someone else. I forget who it was, which is that like people really misunderstand the term clickbait because they only ever apply it to stuff. Well, their problem is they don't only apply it. In theory, it should only be applied to stuff which is actually like tricks you. Like you click it and then it's like, oh, this isn't what you said it was going to be. You know, like, oh, top 10 things that, you know, you go there and it's like there's barely anything written on the guy, and it's clearly like all the effort went into crafting the title, you know, and then once they got you click, well, they're cynical. Well, they've got the click already. It's worthless, right? But I actually have always said to people that like it's so stupid when people take an interview and the headline is a really great quote, which 100% was in context of what was said. It can't be 100% in context of like everything because it's only a quote. But like the quote isn't wrong. Like the person really did say, you know, I think we could win worlds if we do X, Y, and Z, you know. And what they don't realize is if you see that title and it's really enticing to you as a viewer and you click it and then you go and there's a whole thing that's not clickbait. That's actually, that's the best title you can come up with pretty much.
Yeah, so I basically spent all of 2012 and 2013 and 2014 and probably 2015, I guess, like consuming content marketing and you know, marketing podcasts and stuff like that. And obviously, as you produce content, you see what triggers like reaction and what doesn't, and what gets you like attention, so that you can then actually say what you know, finish saying what you want to start to say. Yes. And I learned that lesson really concisely when I had when I was doing like YouTube videos and blog posts, for sure, because it's like almost a disservice, I realized, to the content when I didn't title it appropriately to garner somebody's attention. Yes. And to pull them in. And then you have like, I had these two articles which were like, or these two videos that were, I think one was actually higher quality than the other one and had a lot more benefit to people who had that problem, but like it didn't get any views because it was really late, so I just like threw whatever title on it. It was convenient, and then sent it, like published it. But the one that I'd spent a lot of time like thinking about got a ton of traction, and then I was just like, oh, this is yeah, it's just how the internet works. So
I mean,
there's definitely a increase in that as I got better at it over the years. And I agree, it's only clickbait if you then do something totally different.
Yes, because otherwise, like, it's not clickbait. You're not baiting someone into it. You're just presenting them something they'd like. It's like saying, "Oh, do you want to see Avengers Endgame?" And then they click.
Baiting
it
is like
Avengers
fishing.
Endgame.
You put like a morsel on the hook, you know, and then they eat it, and they're like, "Oh, this isn't food, it's death." You know, that is like where bait comes from.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
I mean,
We're actually just feeding people.
Regarding the whole clickbait stuff, I feel like it's almost necessary to advertise aggressively as possible nowadays on like YouTube and on Reddit, because all the content, it's all under this algorithm, and if you don't play into the game of the algorithm, it doesn't matter if your content is quality. Like, it's not getting judged on the quality of the content, it's getting judged on how many people are willing to click on it, right? And then it'll push it up on YouTube, it'll push it up on Reddit. Like, if people click on it and people upvote it, like half the people on Reddit, like, you guys don't even watch the whole video, you guys don't even watch the whole interview, you guys just have the discussion regarding the title.
By the way, Loco, I'll give you a very quick example of that right now, just because I saw the most perfect example I've ever seen. You know, when people always say that meme of like, oh, people on Reddit don't read the actual article, they just look at the title. I found one where it's 100%. There's actually an article. I don't know if I can actually go into too much detail because they claim I'm like trying to brigade against it by saying it's like a negative thing. But I'll just say this, okay? There's an article on Reddit at the moment where it's basically an interview with Faker, and what he says in the title is like, you know, I've never seen a play, like I haven't, you know, there's no something like I haven't seen a player that really impressed me or something like that. And what's mad is if you click on, because obviously the first thing I did as a journalist is go, oh, I wonder what he's referring to this. So I click the article, I go down to that part where he says, you know, I haven't seen someone who impressed me with their performance or whatever. And when I read it all, actually, it's not even a very controversial statement, because if you look at it, what he was actually asked was, you know, there's all this new talent in the mid lane in LCK at the moment, like Chovy and Showmaker and all these guys who came up with these new teams. And what he essentially is saying, as my interpretation, by saying they haven't impressed him, is more the angle of like, you know, they haven't done enough yet. You know, they're just like, even the best ones just pretty new, and he's Faker, you know, he's played for all these years. Mate, I'm not joking. If you go and look, there's like over 100 comments in this Reddit thread. I searched high and low, and I'm not joking, about 90, maybe 95 of the 100 comments just do a response that's along the lines of like, what, has he never seen Rookie over in China? It's like, that was never what he was talking about. Like, what is this? Like, you've literally taken that statement a point at face value, and what's mad is the rebuttal doesn't even address it. So it's a mad example, right? Where that's 100 comments, Loco, and there's even people debating. What's mad is they'll debate with each other that topic, but they won't read the fucking thing that the original quote was from. They're not even debating Fake, basically.
Yeah,
I feel like that's the beauty of Reddit. Is it still?
Oh, it's a good thing, by the way, Weldon.
Living
it's not a bad
social platform where people actually talk to each other still. Not like a.
No, by the way, I will say, I do not think it's a bad thing, especially if you're in our business, because actually, if you are the person who made the content, that's engagement. Every one of those replies, I want morons to reply who don't read the article. If you have to read the article and reply, I'm going to get way less comments. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying this is like an example of a phenomenon. You know?
So true.
It's a fucking place to be as a content creator in terms of like the whole clickbait subject, because I want to provide quality content, and I want to make sure the title is descriptive of the content that I have, not the most controversial or not the most markety thing, right? I want, if I have a video, then I want the title of the video to be about what the video is actually about. But often enough, I'm just sitting there thinking, what's gonna get me the most click from these people? Like, what like most controversial comment was made, and like what will get people to click on it more so than actually describing the video. So it's a weird place to be in. And yeah, clickbaiting is, or advertising, whatever you want to call it, it's somewhat honest, like, because title of the video should be what the video is about, but that's not what I want to place on there if I want my content to succeed. That's
He's such a sweet, innocent boy, isn't he? Talking about like, why can't advertising just be honest, Mr. Weldon? It's like, have you been following the last, like, do you see the 20th century at all, Loco? You do know that the people who actually invented marketing were literally like using propaganda techniques. That was like how they invented the field. The whole point of marketing, I don't know if you're aware of this concept, is in most fields, the best brand isn't the one that does the most marketing. It's the like the ones that are like the sub-best, because that's their competitive advantage. They spend more on marketing to make up the gap, you know, the fact that their product isn't as good. So, like, I'm not straight roasting you on that, but like basically, the main point of marketing is to sell the people who don't already know about your product and don't already want it. Like the ones who want it, you don't need to sell them, do you?
It's an arms race of what is it? Who can have the most clickbaity content out there?
Sure.
And yes.
What is it that Gary Vee always says? He's like, marketers ruin everything. You just have a new platform and it's fine until marketers come in and then they ruin it. That's his job.
Yeah. It's okay.
I don't know. I found a way to navigate through that. Like, I tried to differentiate between content for people I knew were going to watch it because it's like my thing and they already follow me, and then content that was meant to have viral reach and pull in new eyes. So then the content for like my audience that I was like, this is to serve them and they're going to watch it because it's in their sub feed or like they're paying attention already. Now that you have Discord, you can like share it on Discord, right? So you can actually reach your audience a little more directly than like now Twitter's eliminated the, has an algorithm too. But and then I would title that appropriately, right? The best way for them to find the thing that's applicable to them. And then I would like, okay, this piece is a viral piece. It's meant to go out there and like pull in new people, and a couple of those people are going to stick around. So then it just made me relax a lot, because then 4 out of the 5 titles I could just make really applicable, and then one title it was like a lot of construction and thinking and
Sure.
yeah. So I feel like there's ways to do it where you can, because now YouTube also rewards watch time, I feel like a little bit better than they did 2 years ago.
Yes.
Where if you're watching an hour of your content, it's going to start putting all of the stuff that you do on there for them. So
Yes.
I think that if you're aiming to keep the same people who are already watching it, then you just need to produce quality and searchable stuff. But then you're not going to pull in new people.
Yeah. The reason I bring up this topic, right, is because I feel like, to be fair, if we're going to discuss any of the potentially incendiary things you've said over the years, or just provocative would maybe be a better way to say it.
Sure.
Because the whole point there is it doesn't imply that what you say is wrong. You just phrased it in a provocative manner. People have to know that this is the game you have to play, basically. It's like, basically, I always say this, right? I've said it in Loco week, because he asks me the same question every 5 episodes, which is like, can't you just do all the same things but just not say anything that upsets anyone? It's like, Loco, why am I here? Like, why isn't there another guy sat in this chair? Where's the other guy? I always say this to him, like, you guys are saying to me, oh, I don't want this, and then constantly self-selecting and giving me positive reinforcement. That's exactly what you want. It's like, I make the joke. It's not even a joke, Loco. What happened was, in the early days of Someone in an Insight, we used to reference TSM because it was a show about the LCS. And at the time, TSM was number 1 or number 2. So, of course, we talked about them more than most other teams, right? But because I noticed TSM fans, which there was a lot of on Reddit, understandably, used to always say, all they do in the episode is talk about TSM and criticize them. Then, now, it's not like I'm going to just make up criticism. But if I've got any criticism, I'm definitely going to say it, because that means that part of Reddit's going to go off. And then secondly, if I ever have to give an example of a team that's like overrated or something, I'm going to go with TSM, obviously, aren't I? Like, that's not even dishonest. That's just playing the game, isn't it? Like, so the point is, anyway.
I mean, it's so funny because it's literally how I got my first job. In these TSM Legends content offering, like critical feedback, and then the attention that generated.
Sure.
Got, CLG's attention, so.
Yeah, exactly.
So true.
So, okay.
So now they all love me, even though that's how I got my start, was criticizing their team.
All right, let's get into some of the meat then, because here's the thing, right? What I figure we do with this episode is we get the interesting, like, more meta, abstract things talked about first, and then we'll do like LCS, basically. We'll just talk about what's gone in the LCS the last week, the top teams, etc. CLG, obviously. So, obviously, the context here is it is entertainment. Yeah, we can definitely go back and forth. We can have some interesting tangents, but obviously this can't be a 4-hour podcast where people cite like every scientific study they've ever read and like read massive sections to each other. We're going to have to generally just give our opinions here and see what the interaction is. So with that in mind, Weldon, where would you start us on that famous premise you presented, which is that from your research, talent basically doesn't exist.
Oh,
At least when
here
people think of talent, people think of talent as
start.
like,
this is a good place
I
to
think
start.
so. I think it's a pretty good one, right?
All right,
it sort of lays
so-
out your terms of philosophy.
Generally speaking, people use talent for 2 reasons. One, they're talking about genetic advantage, and then 2, they're talking about an excuse as to why they can't succeed. And
Yes.
so I want to eliminate both of those perceptions for different reasons. One, I think it's a useless mindset to go around through life being like, oh, I can't do this because I'm not talented, so it's just not even worth trying, which is not really the case. I feel like people need a purpose and a thing to fight for anyway, even if they're not going to make it. And there's a healthy way to do that approach that benefits other areas of your life as you're like aspiring to do something at a world-class level, even though, not a lot of people make it to the NBA and stuff like that. But the second thing is that genetic advantage is just not factually true. It's not a good way to look at it. I want people to understand what talent is completely made up of, so that they can like understand a couple things. One, maybe like how to parent better, because they can see where nature versus nurture kind of had a hold in their life to lead them to be in an untalented state, and also that if they want to do something, they can maybe need a longer term plan. So essentially, if you look at talent in the pure genetic respect, you would say the only things that humans can be talented in just purely off genetics are things that we are naturally selected for. So we see that in running, for example, both distance and sprint, where like there's very little skill involved that isn't something that is part of our genetic pool already. But when you get into more complex games or sports, things like shooting or video games or pool or swimming even, you aren't necessary, like we're not naturally selected for this as a survival trait. And so it's essentially it's a mishmash of like performance genetics, and some people can have one and not the other three, and some people can have another one and not the other four. And like it's pretty irrelevant which set you have, because what happens at the top end is that people rely on the strengths that they have and eliminate the weaknesses by covering for them, and then become a world-class athlete based off of those components. So at the top level of swimming, you see basically like people categorized into 3 different clusters, and each one has a different genetic variant of the oxygen like carrying gene, but then like they make use of their other asset to like cover that and to be a world-class swimmer anyway. So I want people to see genetics as a bouncing off point, just the way IQ is in chess. You have to have a certain IQ to become a grandmaster, but it's not descriptive, or rather it's not causally related to like how high you rank up. In fact, it's negatively correlated, right? So like the higher IQ you have, actually the less chance you have of becoming a grandmaster. But at some point below which you cannot become a high level chess player, there is like a limit. And it's the same with genetics. There's like a level that you need to have to be like a sufficiently above average person, and then above that it's all about like how your parents raised you, essentially. And so I do have to tell a bunch of like 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds that like, hey, you weren't gifted in terms of like your peer group and your like how your parents chose to raise you and when you started to play video games. And like it might happen for you if you spend the next 15 years catching up, but then you'll be like a 17-year-old who had really good raising, but you'll be like 30. So is it really worth the next 15 years of your life to like work on all that stuff? Or maybe you should just say, dang, that sucks. I guess I should just do something else with my life. So there is talent, but like I think genetics is a bad way to look at it, and I want people to not think of it that way and see it instead that genetics is a bouncing off point for all of these skill-based things that are like an assembly of different genes, and instead understand that it has a lot more to do with like how you were raised and the mental faculties and the physical faculties that you have already expressed in your body. And sure, you can manipulate some of those over time, but you might have to like spend an exceptionally long time at it in order to catch up to people who just like
it just wouldn't be worth it in terms of the amount of time you have to put in, right?
Yeah, and actually it might be worth it in video games. I mean, maybe you can be a 30-year-old gamer. We don't really know. So if people want to start at the age of 15 and be like, I want to be a pro, and I'm going to be a pro by the time I'm 27, and maybe this is a career where that starts to be worth it. But for basketball, like obviously that's not the case. Or basketball is a bad example because actually there's the height variant.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Hockey, where there's not as much of a height variant.
Well, by the way, like Loco, I actually want to get your take on this, but just very quickly, just to reiterate what Weldon said there, but to be very, very blunt about it. Obviously, he is not talking about like the 100-meter sprint where only running as fast as you can forwards and therefore having like very developed muscles, like the perfect leg length to weight, all these factors that certain people clearly have benefited from. Long distance running, like he said, it's infamous how legendary Kenyan runners are, for example. It's not a coincidence. I don't think they just had the best training in Kenya, although I'm sure they obviously had to do some as well. So like, yeah, those are extreme examples where you've made the variables to win almost based around a genetic component largely, even though, yes, on top of that, they certainly have to train and all the rest of it. As Weldon said there, he's made it like chess, hockey, things that obviously has strategy involved for a start off. Obviously, part of it's like one of the factors here is what I want to get back to after we get Loco on this is the idea that like it's obviously like then you have the aspect of is there an aptitude for learning? But let's get to that in a minute anyway. Loco, what's your thought on it?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So what's your thoughts on this general topic?
I mean, talent definitely exists in video games. That's my thought on it. I mean, talent in like sports and stuff.
Okay, but okay, so but when you say
but like,
that,
is there a monk? Is there like a okay? So is there like a guy in the jungle and he's sitting there and he's like bad at video games? So like a tiger comes and like eats him, so his offspring don't. Like you have to think about when you say talent, like where does it come from? Because people say that and then they immediately go, oh, so you're born that way. But that's not the case. It's not about birth. Right?
Sure, it's not about birth. It's about like how your parents raised you. Like in early childhood, early exposure to video games definitely helps. Early exposure to like pattern learning. Like Korea, it's crazy. Like in Korea, like mom cafe is like a really big thing where a bunch of young moms like group up and then they're like, my kid needs to do this, like they need to learn a second language. By the time they're 5, we need to expose them to this so they can have a choice. If they want to be a musician, it's super important you introduce them to piano before their age of 5. If studying is really important, it's really important like you teach them this before the age of 5. So there's definitely like things that can help you and give you a better aptitude at video games. And it's not from birth, but I would say like how you grew up and the kind of things you were exposed to and the kind of education you were exposed to and the kind of work ethic that you were given and the kind of reward system that you were given for doing certain things like will matter a lot. So you're not born being better at video games, but by the time of, let's say 14, 15, when people are starting to get into high school and when people are starting to like, that would be the age where you compete and you start considering like, hey, can I be a pro? That there is definitely like a talent difference around that level.
The funny thing is, I actually think that means we have 3 slightly different positions entirely on the topic, because actually Loco, when he said there was talent in video games, I assumed he was going to be like, I've known this player and he was like twice as good as he should have been and he never used to practice or whatever. But actually the bizarre thing is, like, for example, when Loco said there, like, it definitely helps if you like played on the computer when you're young, etc. The funny thing is, I'm amazed he gives that as an example, because it's actually infamous in South Korea because of the PC bans that you get people who've never had a computer and they're 14 years old and they just play like 3 years and they become a top pro. They become amazing. Like, I think actually, believe it or not, Flash from StarCraft Brood War supposedly like never had a PC, and I think he actually within like 1 year of playing on a PC, he was like a pro gamer. So in that scenario, like, yeah, go on.
It's so much easier in Korea to become a pro player or be good at a video game due to, I mean, not just the culture, but the accessibility of PC Cafe and the cheapness of PC Cafe. So it's like $1 an hour, and also if you're young enough, like they'll let you play there a little bit longer, and also like if you sweep the floors or if you mop, like, no, I'm not even joking.
It's like a Zen monastery. Or
yeah,
something.
I'm not even joking. Okay. Like when me and a bunch of my friends were in middle school, we would get to play, and they gave us a really good deal. So you used to be able to smoke, and you used to be able to smoke in the PC bunks. And if
I've never heard this story.
If you clean up after like the smokers, and if you clean up in the smoking room, that they would let us play extra hours, especially on the non like prime time hours. And then that all went to hell when fucking the government made it so you couldn't stay in PC bang after like 9 hours or after 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. But it's if you're born in America and you wanted to become a PC gamer and your mom or dad didn't buy you a PC, I think it's almost impossible. But in Korea, it's definitely possible without owning a personal computer due to the cheapness of PC bunks.
Well, I think what Thorin was talking about was like, you have these people who played for 5 years and became a StarCraft 2 pro. Then you have this guy, what's his name, Flash?
Yeah.
Yes.
Who played for 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or something along those lines. Some ridiculously crazy example.
I think that's more incriminating of the other 4 years of training that those other pros were like doing in terms of quality, maybe than like Flash's talent. Although that's obviously part of it. But yeah.
By the way, Loco, like, I'm hate to break it to you, mate, but you know that, like, really old, like, really wise guy who ran that PC bang, and then he used to tell you, like, oh, Loco, you're trying to learn jungling, right? Well, here's the thing, if you come and wax my car, like, do this, like, that's like when you move the screen up to the side, you were like, oh, I'm learning so much from this, and he's like, yeah, and after that, like, you got to hit every minion, Loco. That's going to be like when you sweep all the dirt off the floor. Come on, Loco, left to right, that's right, left to right, like, I'll pretend to be Mad Life, I'll stand behind you telling you what to do.
It's often enough, like, because PC bangs used to be, so how it started was, so there's usually 2 systems for paying. You either pay before, like, you're like, hey, I want 5 hours, here's $5, or like you get a card and then you're like, okay, hey, I took a card, and then you log in.
It's scored already, Loco.
And then you pay later.
It's like, I'll pay at the end, doesn't have the money. And this is like the old, the old gag where in the Western comics it was always that you went into a restaurant, you didn't have the money to pay, and you're like washing the dishes up at the end or whatever. It's like that version, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I told him I would pay tomorrow, or I would go borrow from my friends, and he's like, no, if you actually clean up, then you can play here longer. And I didn't do that super regularly, but it was a way.
You scammed him.
Hey, it wasn't scamming. Like, I'm scamming him for what, like $1 or $2, and then he like he's also like owns the PC bang, and he doesn't want to get part-time workers because that's money out of his pocket, and your margins are so small. So he's like,
you didn't think it through, Loco. When that split went badly and you lost to CLG in the finals, and then Worlds obviously went to shit as well. What you should have done is when everyone came home after that, you should have had the little like rag on, you had the Windex out, you should have a spotless environment. Yeah, exactly. You should have said, listen, Reggie, I can do a lot more than just coach, And he just said, I fucking hope you can do something.
Okay. Well, in terms of speaking about actual talent, I think talent in League of Legends is a lot of talent in League of Legends is aptitude for learning things, like aptitude for learning champions, aptitude for learning situations and not repeating the situation, or learning exactly what you need to do in that situation and going to it next time. League of Legends is not a mechanically intense game. League of Legends is one of the easiest mechanical games currently in pro play, like barring Hearthstone or Magic. Like, don't fucking talk to me on Magic or Hearthstone, but compared to like
physical esports and the game esports.
Yeah.
I think of the physical esports. Yeah.
I think most challenger players and most masters players, if you show them like a situation, let's say where Bjergsen outplays someone or Faker or Chobi outplays someone, and you tell them, hey, you're gonna be put in this situation. There's gonna be someone coming in from this angle. They're gonna have flash up. You're gonna have your flash up. And I want you to save your flash until they use this spell and then flash it, and then you'll be able to win this one-on-one. Most Masters Challenger players would be able to pull off the same play that Chobi and all these other players are actually able to do. I think the real difference is coming from these players that are super good at tracking flashes, tracking spells, knowing when to turn, and the actual mechanical execution of a play isn't that impressive. It's just knowing and being able to track everything and being able to fully execute that. That's where it's really impressive.
So it's actually the reason, is just as a side tangent, why I actually think League of Legends is most obviously, of all esports games I'm aware of, the most, in theory, I would say, like, kind to coaching, because unlike any other game, and in most sports even, because there's no concept of a timeout, you have to basically train your players so that after the first second of the game, they can figure everything out themselves.
Yeah.
So as a result, think how hard that is. Like in every traditional sport, you can at least call a timeout and go by like, hey, listen, guys, you aren't doing the plan at all here. Like, you over here, like, I'm going to sub you out. I need to bring this guy. You can't do any of that. So that's why I always said, like, that's one of the most interesting parts of when people try to have the debate of Korea versus like the West, because we had no clue what the coaching structure was like in Korea for a long time. So we weren't even comparing what the initial conditions were. But anyway, the question was, the tangent I want to go back to was that angle on like aptitude of learning, or just aptitude. Like I wouldn't necessarily just say learning, because there's some people where it feels like they just need less raw practice hours to get even the mechanical level to a high degree, So the reason I bring this up, Weldon, is like, as a general rule, yeah, I would say 99% of players are probably within like some sort of a middle part of a bell curve of how skilled they are, what natural talent they have or skill or whatever, whatever metrics you'd use. And yeah, obviously life decisions and coaches is probably going to determine which way they go in that respect, right? But you obviously do get these individuals who they're outliers, but they're obscenely good, and some of them famously actually don't really have much of a work ethic. Like, what do you say to that?
I mean, I think a lot of the work is hidden. Like, most of the work that people put into learning is to try to achieve a kind of like a state of neuroplasticity, right? That is very natural in flow state. So if you have a person who just is in flow state and they're just like in the game and they're picking up everything really rapidly, and you have somebody who has to work super hard at it, then obviously that other person's talent is the speed of which they learned the game. I think there's a good example of this is prodigies, like child prodigies that are focused by their parents on like a very specific kind of thing. They don't really end up having better kind of like genius outcomes in terms of life in the top end after they're a prodigy. It's more like the rate of learning. So I think that you could say it's a very similar style of thing where these people have a really high rate of learning because they're just really good at focusing and learning really fast. I think a simple example of that is Dardoch versus like, for example, Biofrost. So Biofrost was playing much less League of Legends when he went pro. From college. Like, he was in college and he was playing like 4 to 6 hours a day, and Dardoch when he went pro was playing like 10 to 12 hours a day. But they were like, close to the same rate on the level on the ladder. And I mean, I think obviously Dardoch had a little bit more in terms of like brilliance and this like kind of like mechanics and this insane aptitude for the game.
I think even mentality probably helped him as well, right? He had a
Crushing,
very intense
aggressive mentality.
Yeah.
But what I saw when you took Biofrost and then you took his like 4 to 6 hours he was training and you upped it to 10 to 12 hours, well then, because he had concentrated his ability to learn in like a smaller area, like his skill level blossomed really fast. And we have Dardoch and he's like playing 10 to 12 hours and he's not a pro, and then he becomes a pro and he's playing 10 to 12 hours. The only thing you can really work on is how effective is that 10 to 12 hours. But he wasn't focused a lot on like reducing his playtime and increasing his learning aptitude. He was just playing more volume, you know, when he was an amateur. So that's a simple example of like how rate of learning, I think, is really important.
Because here's a question I have that leads on from that, right? And basically, this will get to the crux of what is probably considered most controversial about Weldon Green, which is the angle of do you actually 100% believe all of your philosophy is like, it's all 100% grounded in science, it's like replicable, like it's all totally accurate in that sense? Because I noticed one of the things you've done now personally, I would speculate and say some of it goes into what we said before. It's like marketing, it's knowing how to bill your thing as the hot product, you know, and obviously there is something to it, so you're not lying, but in doing so, a clever approach can obviously be to dismiss other people's approaches or say it's not as good. You know, it's a pretty good strategy. It's actually, in fact, if you notice, used classically in advertising. They don't just say that, you know, the dishwashing stuff gets yours this. It's better than the other brand, isn't it? It's like 20% better. So what I'm going to get at here is I've noticed that a lot of times you get mad at other people. I wouldn't have made up mad. You just get irritated at other people's terms. Like when Loco was trying to talk about talent there. And he didn't define, like he made it very vague. He just made it, it was like, it's like when someone says God, he just took everything supernatural, made it God, right? But he could never nail down, well, what does that mean? Like, what is God and where does the limits come? It's like, by definition, he'd made no limits to it, right? It was just a term that he was using. Now he was using it as a placeholder because this is an incredibly complicated topic. No one really knows in video games down to the letter of what everyone's doing. But this is the reason I asked this question is, are you actually someone who's open to, in the sense of how you just model things in your mind, or is this all actually like a nuts and bolts thing you think you could lay out in papers it would completely check out?
No, this is like a personality flaw and a little bit of a background flaw, because like I've always thought in very like systemic level, like try to figure out the overall principles and then everything derives from there.
Right.
And so it takes me like a couple go arounds to be more open-minded for sure, and that's something I've worked on over the last 20 years, you know, and 15 years of my marriage for sure. But but like more importantly, it's part of my background, right? So I have a very scientific background, and it's very hard for people who haven't done like experimental research or research at the graduate level and above to like have a scientific frame of mind around the definition of terms, I think, especially when they're creating like really complex, you know, in the field that I'm in, the definition of terms is very important so that we can actually have productive conversations.
Of course,
and I find that like having those productive conversations is easy with people who don't have a scientific background if we can all agree on the same term and what it means and what goes into it. But that doesn't mean that I'm limited in terms of what we've discovered as what exists, and what we haven't discovered is all false, because I think that actually we're vastly limited in our ability to measure stuff, which is why like when we're talking about talent, like we know that at some place there's some way to measure something that would be predictive of somebody's success, but currently we never have. There's never been any measurement that you could apply to like a 12-year-old that could tell who is going to be the pro gamer, and there's never been a test for like the 8-year-old basketball player or the 10-year-old basketball player to say who's predictive of who's going to become in the NBA. So even if there is talent that exists somewhere there, like we don't know what it is and we can't measure it. We certainly can't pretend.
Okay. Dude, speaking on top of that, like in NFL and NBA, like in draft, like it's not even, what if it's just taking random high schoolers? Like these are college athletes that played a year or played several years of their sport. They're still busts. And the number one draft pick still isn't the best. So even in sports that's been around for centuries, like people can't still figure out like who's going to be the best player and who's worth that number one spot. There's still draft. Oh, who's that guy that got traded recently that got picked number one in NBA? Oh, is it
Marcel Fultz, maybe?
Yeah, Marcel Fultz.
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, he got picked number one in 2018. So this was last year, and he's getting traded because he's not good enough. Markelle Fultz, yeah, he's not good enough, and they don't think he's worth the #1 pick. So it's still happening in like NBA. Like, how the fuck are we gonna figure it out in League of Legends or esports, which have been around what, maximum 20 years if you want to stretch, like call it Quake is esports also. So yeah.
Yeah. So to Thorn's point, yeah, yeah, I definitely make things black and white, and it helps me a lot in my conversations. But it's a lot easier for me to be convinced when I talk to people that agree on the terminology, and then
Sure.
make a point with those terms. Then I'm like, oh yeah, I see that point.
Like, if you notice, that's basically what I did at the beginning of this conversation. I tried to get us all to define our basic position,
Yeah.
what the concept of talent is.
That's what you do a lot of times at the beginning of your interviews.
Because if you notice, it cut out within 5 minutes. We actually were a vaguely interesting point in the conversation, as opposed to, if you notice, 99% of people, whichever side they're on, so the people who are against the concept that there's no talent, Weldon, just all they do is just cite off examples of people they think were talented without ever explaining, what made them talented, how talented are they? It's like they don't understand that even if somehow they were right, they wouldn't be right because they haven't explained it. They just gave an example, didn't they?
Because we're not talking about the same thing, even though we are talking about the same thing.
Yes.
Talking the same thing, yeah. So.
Because the thing is, what I wanted to just say, when you were explaining it there. Oh, sorry, I think it cut for a second. Yeah.
Yeah, it did.
Go ahead. Yeah,
all
it's
right.
good.
I was going to say that's probably my fault.
Keep going.
Because like I'm the one with the voice box, right? So like I should be doing a lot more listening. But like it was very easy early on when I had attention to drown out people because I had enough attention to do that, even though
sure.
And like I feel like that's something I've learned with the mantle of the influencer comes the necessity to like listen a lot more. So that's something I've definitely been working on.
It depends on what kind of influencer you want to be, right? There's definitely influencers, once they get enough of a voice, they just drown out everything, and their voice is the only thing they want to project.
Are we talking about Trump or?
No. We're talking about influencers in the space. I think there's so many people, especially like streamers, once they get to a certain point, like they become immune from criticism because their fan base is so big, and they can also just
I see what you mean.
Like blind out stuff and be like, no, what I say is correct, and I'm just gonna do this.
Well, ironically, actually, just to pick up on Weldon's point there, actually, when he says like Trump actually could not have anywhere close to the influence he had if it was not for the mainstream media absolutely signal boosting all of his messages and portraying them in a certain light. If they didn't do that whatsoever and he only had a Twitter account, you'd have like 10% of the influence or something. He doesn't have like 700 million people on his Twitter account,
Right.
So like that's actually an example of where people don't realize that they, like we said about the thing before with the Reddit example, they actually participating in signal boosting exactly the message they claim not to like. Mm-hmm. It's kind of wildness. But okay, the point I wanted to make though was the reason I asked that question, it's not a gotcha, is because when you were explaining your philosophy on, like, for example, how would someone who appears to have more talent to someone who just thinks in those terms, how could they practice like half as much and be twice as good, basically? And you used the term flow state, right? Now, here's the thing. I'm sure there are studies out there. I've actually seen them, for example, the ones that are like with Buddhist monks where they get into a meditative state and they can raise the body temperature of when they're in snow and stuff like this. You can see that there are certain mental states that famously they use like MRIs, to see what your brain state is like. The problem with that is, though, even though that might be a term that has some grounding in science, it's very difficult to use in esports, right? Like, really, you're guessing most of the time. Like, no one really, like, let's face it, no one's ever had Bjergsen's brain in an MRI machine while he was playing League of Legends, because for start off, it'd be impossible. Like, unfortunately, you can't take computers into MRIs with you, so it'd be very, very difficult to do that. So at the moment, when you use that term, that is kind of like, that's just in your model at the moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, we understand the symptoms of flow state, like what people describe when they're in a flow state versus when they aren't.
Sure.
And then we're aware of what, if you're not in flow state, how to get performance similar to flow state by focusing on, basically there's like three categories or silos, you could say, that are important for that. One is that your mind is focused on the present and not the past or the future. That you're focused non-judgmentally instead of judgmentally. So like whatever it is just is, not like bad or good. And then task focus instead of outcome focus. So you're focused on like the process of shooting instead of like hoping you're going to make a basket. So by like comparison, we're able to say like, okay, if these people who are doing these three things, but they're not in flow state, but they have performance that's 95 to 97% as good as somebody who's in flow state, as according to them, like we have to say that you have to say that you're in flow state. You describe what it felt like, and we're like,
Sure.
yeah, that's flow state. Then we kind of know that like flow state is that natural, insane focus on the present moment in a non-judgmental state with with an outcome focus. And you can part that lizards don't have,
Sure.
essentially, because that's the part that's concerned with image and face and judgment and these kind of like worries about the outcome of the game rather
Sure.
than just the animalistic brain.
Because you want to know something funny, Weldon, is I actually think I could make my own statement that would shock some people because, again, they're going to have heard the term and it's going to immediately trigger in their mind emotional memories of this exact concept. And they're going to take that model and think, how can you say that's not true? So I'll give you an example I was thinking of while you were talking there, which is I actually don't think as a concept that there is such a thing as a clutch player in any game I've ever actually followed. What I would describe as this is the people that are called clutch, because the reason why I say that is people say they're clutch as though it was like an attribute of them as a person. Like, for some reason they just make the last shot. They don't. Here's what's great is if you've ever gone, I remember there was actually an interview I heard with Kobe Bryant that was like this. When they were asking him how he'd made all these like buzzer beaters and last second shots, right? If it was a movie and you asked someone about being clutch, part of it would be like, well, I just believed that was clutch, or, like I just knew the shot was going. It'd be all that sort of thing. That's what people would think it would be psychological. Right? It wasn't. What he literally said was he tried to make it as purely mechanical as possible. And so it had nothing to do with what he was thinking about. And all he would do is just shoot that shot 1,000 times. And then when he would be in a clutch scenario where he's got 1 second left or whatever, he would go to the spot on the floor that he has taken those shots from thousands of times, and he would try to only focus on this being a shot and the mechanical execution of it, and not think, is it the last shot? Is it the first shot? Is this the seventh shot I missed? Is it the fifth shot I've made? All he would do is mechanically execute, and if anything, he was actually trying to make his brain not have any effect on it, as it were, But he was trying to limit all the factors down to that. So in that kind of a setting there, and I would say the same from people I've seen in Counter-Strike where they're amazing in those scenarios, they're actually not doing anything incredible. If you ever talk to them, if you ever get friendly with them, they're just people who, when they're in that scenario, they make it very boring. They're like, right, I'm in a 1v3, so I'll make this first one a 1v1 here if I can, but if he actually shoots me too much, it's going to be really hard on the second one, so I'll have to, make the correct, they just do it like that. They make it sound like they're doing a shopping list. It's very boring, yeah. But what's great is it looks amazing, right?
I would argue that people who are clutch, like you say, they're either really good at making the pressure moment mundane, or they're really good at increasing the pressure in their training so that they're always under intense pressure, and then it's like their natural output. They don't feel more pressure when they're making
anyone could learn that technique, right?
Sure, yeah. Some people can't because they're already 17 years old and they've already been raised by their parents and they just don't have the kind of like personality for it. And sure, maybe if they spent another 10 years working on themselves, they could. But yeah, to your point, I don't think it's like given by birth, but I think certainly there's personalities that I've met where I'm like, okay, you could be a clutch player, but you're not going to be a clutch player in your League of Legends career. Yes. So let's just not rely on that, because you're not going to develop the capability to do that.
And by the way, as a quick point, Loco, you definitely get it now, but I'm just going to say as a quick point for everyone listening, the reason also why I asked Weldon if he's open to like different ideas and modeling it is because, again, this is not going to be a 7-hour podcast. And as all of us just talk here, hopefully we make interesting points along the way. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about this is because, as Weldon said, no one has actually nailed. We don't know exactly what neuron in someone's brain has to fire in a certain way, followed by a connection of a thought to execute an action, right? So as a result, all we really do is we hopefully explain some of it, but we are always just chasing the vagueness into a new hole. So, for example, we went from like talent to like flow state to like now, maybe it's aptitude. It's like these are all vague terms, and as much as you chase them and hopefully get some along the way, we're never going to catch the rabbit at the end. We're never going to actually know. And well, maybe in 50 years or something.
I have a good analogy for this. It was Euclid, right? No, Newton. Newton created the laws of physics. When the apple fell in the tree, and it was like generally accurate. We thought really accurate, and then we found out when Einstein came along, actually they're just approximations. They're just guesses, like that kind of function at the level of the world that we can see. Yes. And then Einstein came up with the correct formula to actually predict where something's going to fly when it's flying through the air. Theory of relativity, and it's only came about because we could measure stuff, right? He even made these theories, and he didn't even get to see them like proven through measurement, until later. Mm-hmm. But it's the same with psychology. Like we cannot measure the brain in enough detail to see the biological underpinnings of what's going on. We can only measure, looking at like 10,000 and 15,000, sometimes 300,000 neurons at a time. unless we like rip open the brain and shine light through it while it's doing stuff like we do with mice studies, right? But
I'll volunteer Loco to take part in that kind of a study if you want to.
Where I
play League of Legends. We want to know where League of Legends come from. We're going to light bulb in your brain.
Obviously, we want to use the most average League of Legends player we can find, to represent, the majority of the groups. Or yeah, exactly.
And so, so psychology is like the Newtonian physics, where we're just like, okay, this is approximately what we know, so we're gonna talk about the software and try to figure out from that end what's going on. And then you have neurobiology, or neuroscience, which is on the hardware side and working that direction. And like in 50 years, we will, like, psychology is going much more toward cognitive behaviorism, which is like much more rooted in the physical of the brain.
Sure.
And that is going much more toward neuroscience every year. And eventually it's going to be the point where like psychology and neuroscience are the same thing, because we're going to have tools delicate enough to measure this stuff and say what's happening. But until then, we're Newton instead of Einstein.
Oh,
sure.
Guessing based on how the apple flew.
So, well, I guess my 2 cents on it is the players I worked with and players I played with, and personally as a player, like the people that were more clutch and that were just better in high pressure situations, I felt like they could just focus in on the situation better, and things that wasn't on the monitor just disappeared. Sure. And it became like really mundane, and they didn't care about it. I remember when I was a pro player and I used to play a lot, my desk would be so fucking messy, and people are like, yo dude, your desk is so messy, and I wouldn't remember my desk being messy. I would just be so focused on the monitor, and these like little pieces didn't matter. And whenever I would play, like I would say like 90%, 95% of my brain power just went to the game itself and what is going on. And Mad Life described things.
I won't make a joke. I keep going.
Oh, sure. Shut the
going.
fuck up. And Mad Life, someone that's like really infamous for never being hyphy whenever he does something like super cool. Whenever he lands like a Mad Life hook, he's not like, oh my god, I landed that hook. He's like, he flashed,
sure.
Or yeah, go for this. Like he's just really focused in on the moment, and then like afterwards, like that's where like people show emotions afterwards. And yeah, like the better the players I worked with, the more they cared, the less they cared about things outside of the game and outside of the moment, and the more clutch they were. Like generally, like the players that struggled a lot with being clutch or performing were the ones that cared about Reddit too much, ones that cared about Twitter too much, ones that cared about, hey, am I going to have a job next split? Am I going to get subbed out or whatever?
People are overthinking it. People aren't thinking in the moment, like Weldon said.
Yeah, and yeah, it's
basically
just
right.
Being focused in on the moment.
Because the reason why I want to set all that up is, like, as you actually implied, you need to kind of figure out the first principles everyone has. Because obviously we want to have a discussion about coaching now. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, if there's all this talent and if people like, it's so much on the player itself, then coaching doesn't have much impact at all. Coaching would just be sort of saying who goes on the field first almost, or, oh, you're in charge of this small area here. But again, this ties into the area, right? Weldon, how would you explain a coach? Like, so if you're the coach, for example, somebody's got sports psychology training, how would you explain the impact? Because I have seen in a lot of your different interviews, the number, like you said, the imaginary number for the sake of giving a hypothetical that you give to, how much someone could improve or what the impact would be. I've noticed that depending on the interview and how you felt that day, the number goes up and down, I've seen it go crazy before, mate. I've seen it like 40% before, and I was like, I don't know about that, Weldon. But, I've always said this. If it was even 5%, that could be a lot for a player, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the player. So you want a ballpark number. So the number I would give is like 99% the player and 1% the coach.
Really?
That's like the saying, right? Because it's really they're doing all the work.
It's also a good way to convince them to do kind of what you want as well. Because it's like, you guys did it. Like, that's the best way to do it.
But there's also the argument that came from, what is it like? What is that? Who's the governor of California? Schwarzenegger. The Schwarzenegger documentary where they're asking the guy, like, how much of this is the drugs and how much of it is the work? And he's like, it's 100% working out in the gym. It's also 100% diet. It's also 100% the drugs, like like you can't have it without, so like without the coach, it's zero. Even though because that 1% also represents the amount that you were above the opponent, right? So I think that the real answer is it depends on if the player is at the peak and what style of coach they have. And I'll explain what I mean by that. There's two ways to think about skill development in sport. You're either developing up to a level at which we know and we know how to get there, or you're at the you're at the front edge, you're a pioneer, and you have to like
Adapt
go off into
and
the
create.
unknown,
Yeah.
right?
Invent some shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are not yet like at the peak of what we already know how to do, then you can have a coach who like knows that path and can get you there pretty rapidly.
Yeah,
And
super
that kind of coaching
accelerate,
is like
yeah.
really effective, right? That's where Irene is with these guys. Like I can't coach the CLG players like how to be better at League of Legends. They're too good. But then Irene comes in and he actually can. Like he's like, this shouldn't happen here, and you should take this trade. And they're like, oh, you know. And like there's some players where he wouldn't be able to do that because they'd be too good already. You know, they'd be better than him, and so he would be less effective at that thing than he is here. So I think if you have a player and you have a coach who like knows more and a player who knows less, then it's like massive. It's 50%, 60%, 70% of the growth can be attributed to that. But then I was actually wondering how to explain this as a system, and last year at the end of the year, I was at this conference in Texas with the coach of Barcelona Football Club, and he was giving a presentation on how they coach their players. And he was like, basically, you can't coach these players how to play football. They're too good, and the way that they think about the game is too advanced. It's like we're at the edge of football, beyond which there is nothing known. And so they go out on the field and they're scrimmaging with each other in this team, and they're like doing the edge of football. Like there's nothing to teach them. We can keep them founded on the basics, right? Which is what I do and what they do, like as principal. They're drilling the basics and making sure they're all covered, and then they're just watching. And when they see a play happen like 3 or 4 times, they're like, okay, this guy's doing this and he's calling it this way and he's moving this way. That's a play. That's like a new thing. They identify it. He said, I can't remember the term that he used. It's irrelevant. But anyway, he's like, basically we take that thing that we saw and we look for conditions to put around it, and we explain it back to the players and we teach it back to them, what they're doing naturally. And then we make a decision tree around it. Like, this is how you know when to do it. This is when you shouldn't do it. And they do all the strategy around it. And they're like, okay, now you have a new play in your playbook. And this is like new football. And he said that's basically that's how we coach. That's what we coach. It's a game. We drill the basics. We make sure all of the probabilities are covered for fundamental play. And then we like observe pioneers at work and we teach back to them what they're discovering.
So
I think in that case, the coach is like that 1% thing I was talking about, where they're like the thing on the top that is like filtering through what the players are already uncovering and like trying to rapidly turn it into something they can replicate.
I think it's really different for League of Legends than soccer, and it's very, very specific to League of Legends. So when I was a gameplay, or most of the time, like I've never been a non-head coach, but even as a head coach, my thing was gameplay, and I know gameplay. So initially, when coaching was really new, I could just teach like basic macro, priority, vision, objective, and just getting people under that system was enough to provide a lot of value and push my team to like the next level and like win championships on TSM. And then when we got to the top, the thing I found was, okay, we know basic macro and we're trying to perfect basic macro. Like, what's after that? So there's like Korean players that lane better. So you would borrow from Korean players that lane better and you would teach them those small concepts. And after you learn those concepts, the thing about League of Legends is the game is always changing and the information is so vast and so wide, where I felt like the best things that you can do as a strategic coach is keep researching and keep watching other regions and keep talking to other coaches, because just the information is so wide and it's always changing. And if you can provide the most updated, the newest information, like the newest hacks, like the newest tricks, like it would be really good. You know, like the Frostmancy thing that happened recently, the Kleptoprocs with Kleptoproc with the support item, right? Where you don't last hit and you farm the gold. That strategy was out about a week and a half before it came out, and I saw it in a random YouTube video. And there's just so many things that people like in League of Legends, after you perfect it, I guess there is no true perfection in League of Legends because the game is always, always, always changing. And it's super important as a strategic coach to provide value. You keep borrowing and you keep drawing, and you don't even have to create new things. There's just so much information out there. Being able to go through the information and provide the valuable things to the players and identify what's going to be valuable and being able to teach is such a huge skill.
I would say that what you described is exactly why 2016 summer TSM was like successful to the level it was. Like, I think it was a good team, but I think the reason we had such a score line was because I had like 4 other assistant coaches, each working with a player, and every single day they would have to watch that player's scrims and then go investigate be a secretary for that player, investigate every single region and create a spreadsheet of clips to like all of the different scenarios that came up in the day, and like be a filter for like the world information into what we needed to do that weekend. And that was like it. That was the only thing we needed to stay above the competition at that point.
Because here's the thing, Weldon, is like one area that I want to ask, because I want to go back on that topic, but a quick digression I need to ask you about is this. What you just described there about the coaching element and these components and how you can like be a catalyst for someone to improve, or maybe players to work together who are disparate elements, that all sounds great, right? And if you build that up in that way, then logically, for example, if the West had significantly better infrastructure and coaching techniques and systems, etc., than Korea, which, you know, we could get to that later. I actually think they're probably actually overrated in that respect. Then that would be a way to catch up, and that would be a way to supersede Koreans even potentially. Because again, you know, if raw talent is not a thing that's going to literally make you better at League of Legends, you have to train yourself and learn, etc. How do you resolve that though, with the argument that you were making with Mark Z, that like you essentially made it like you made all the League of Legends players in the world ants, and if you just had enough ants in this one colony that were practicing each other, NA, and it wasn't enough compared to EU and Korea, and they had more, then you made it sound like I think you or Mark literally said that like mathematically at the top end of the pyramid, you know, you will just have more elite players, which like, how does that work then with the coaching and the talent aspect? How do you resolve the two principles?
I mean, I guess I just believe strongly in the bell curve, that when you have a bell curve, you have the outliers.
Sure.
So you have a bigger bell curve, so you have more outliers. And then if you take the structure that existed in Korea at the start of League, which was they had farm teams.
Sure.
So like Huni was on a team of 15 other players, all aiming for like that 5-player spot. So there were like 20 players all like supported by for example, Spirit and then Expect were both in the same farm team in Korea, and there were like 18 to 23 people in his pod, like in his group of people that they were together, and they were like all in Seoul, like trying to beat each other out to get that starting spot. And I think that first of all, there was a bigger bell curve, and then they concentrated all of the outliers at the top into like a more of a coaching environment. And he said that they had 3 coaches that would go around and like coach their solo queue, and then they would do like 5v5s within the training pod against each other, and they would have like a draft coach for each one. And these were people who used to coach in StarCraft and then just got moved over to there, so they already had this like working with young men, like basic capabilities of working young men. Like, these are the basics of the game. Don't mess that up, you know, or we'll put this guy in. So they could just do that, and that formed its own sort of pressure. I think that pressure cooker was just really, really good at the beginning, and I still think we haven't matched it. Like, sure, we have like the academy in NA, but it's not like the academy on every team is threatening the main spot to the level at which was ever done in Korea. And certainly there's not like 20 people all gathered together, like, you know, playing at the same PC bang every day and having that kind of like work ethic and building each other up in that way.
The 2014, or I would say from 2013, 2014, 2015, that's when Korea massively pushed the gap between Korea and North America. And I think a lot of that came from sister teams, like being able to scrim internally and being able to try out stuff and being able to try matchups over and over again was so valuable.
Both level. But with sister teams, when both teams were at the pro level.
Yeah.
Like
2015, 2014,
like
2015.
Yeah.
Blades Frost, Samsung White, Samsung Blue, those days where they can constantly push each other. And that, I think, furthered the gap more so than anything else.
Okay. Because this is the question I had then, though. Because even if you present the model, like, okay, you agree that you're looking... So what we're talking about when we're talking about the best League of Legends players basically is the extreme end of the bell curve. Like, even if... I'll give you an example, okay? Even if people want to meme on him, actually, Golden Glue, bearing in mind there's not many NA talents, Golden Glue would be on the extreme... He would be an outlier. He'd be at the very end of the bell curve. He's not a normal player. That's why every time he goes down into Academy where he plays all the NA play, he dumpsters them. He actually is one of the best players when he's at that level, right? Wouldn't that then, Weldon, to some degree, that logic necessitate that actually, bearing in mind you have to have, Right, I realize residency is going to ruin this argument somewhat. You have to have, in theory, 3 NA players on your team in the LCS. And yet we've seen there's like a couple of good NA players who just get passed around teams and then they're always in the good teams. And then there's a lot of like turnover of the other people. Like you get the new rookie jungler comes and he's out again when he doesn't have a good time. You get some support come in and then, it didn't work out on his team. So he's out in a new chunk. Right, in that scenario, wouldn't it make more sense then for Western teams to try and get all of those outliers and give them all the best coaching possible? Wouldn't that actually be a better strategy than just doing these makeshift imports?
Yeah, to an extent, because you have to factor in that League of Legends is a massively team game. So even if you win the 1v1 in mid lane, like if you can't use your prio to influence the map, then it's irrelevant. Whether you got the, and if you can't hear that the gank is coming, this is the language barrier then. But like assuming natural communication between the players, then yeah, I think that the best League of Legends teams in NA should have a imported mid and top laner, the 2 most intensive roles. For that, maybe you could make an argument for AD carry, except I think because bot lane and support depend so much on each other's skill level that like if you're thinking pure strategy, it should be the isolated lanes that have interface with the opponent where no other factor is affecting.
Yeah, you don't want to. The problem with importing AD is agency. When you're most powerful comes later in the game, and getting to that part, if the other teams have good imports in mid and top, they can prevent the AD carry from ever being active.
Yeah, so I would agree.
So then let's tie it into reality then. So is this something in CLG? Because I noticed when you signed up with CLG, it wasn't just like, right, I've joined as the coach, let's see how this goes, say I'm doing another team. It was kind of implied like it was more than just being a coach. Right? This is like you're part of like long-term development. This is a long-term project, right?
Yeah, when I signed up, I was like, I don't want to do the off season because off season, like I'm not confident in my skill at that. I don't think I'm a particularly good player scout. I don't think I'm particularly good at assessing talent. I don't think that I've never tested it, so I don't know if I'm particularly good at building rosters. So as long as you have that system, like you have management and talent scouting, like I'm okay partaking. But then it all fell onto me. Anyway, so I was like, well, okay, so obviously, if you're going to build the best roster, you should have best possible native talent in AD carry support and jungle, and then you should import mid and top within the realms of budget and realistic capability, and that's what we aimed to do for sure.
By the way, for anyone who now goes, wait a minute, you kept Darshan, like everyone knows the season story where it could have been Flame, but then supposedly the team didn't want to spend the money or something, right? So you actually could have done what you said, imported those positions, right? Yeah,
well, so we're limited in reality, right? Where there's CLG had just got like 8th place and 7th place, so it's just like in basketball, like it's hard for the Knicks to sign players.
Of course,
like want to go somewhere.
Unless you pay them a lot of money.
Unless you pay them a crap ton more money, and like CLG's not going to do that because that doesn't make sense in esport economics, in League of Legends economics to do, right? You should just focus on getting there a little bit more slowly and saving a lot of money instead of risking it so much. So I feel like we really, I know he's probably going to listen to this, but I feel like we got really lucky with Power of Evil. Like, I aimed for him like super hard. He was my #1 choice because I think that he was like a little bit of a money ball, where like his performance and his statistics over time and his capability on the champions that he's like masters, and everybody that I talked to when I like scouted him out, all the opponents were like, yeah, this is how it is to lane against him in this. Like they all kind of said the same thing, but then like his like reputation that he uses to like demand placement on a team is like for some reason not matching. Like
and in public, the public doesn't seem to ever.
And the public too. Yeah. So I was like, all right, so this is how we make it back. This is how we moneyball ourselves back up, and then like once you get rid of like the obvious world-class top laners, then you have to say like, okay, what's the cost benefit of the massive increase in investment versus Darshan's performance on his best best champions.
But it
and
is
the best
way,
meta with a good coach.
I'm famously known, okay, as somebody who's an admirer of Flame's gameplay. But if you have to pay Flame 4 times more than Darshan, I would, and crucially, like you said, the expectation is not that this will take us to number 1. It might take us from number 8 to number 5.
4, right? Yeah.
I would just say keep Darshan on that one. You know, let's gamble that we can make him a bit better or working the team better. That makes perfect sense.
I thought CLG was in a really weird spot in offseason where after they got Power Beeble and they're talking to EU top laners and Flame, they're in a spot where I felt like this is a team that could push for 3rd potentially. We didn't know 100 Thieves would blow up. We didn't know how good TSM would be, so maybe it was presumptuous to say, but I thought CLG was in that weird spot where they could be 5, 4, or 3. And 5, 4, or 3, like, it matters so much whether you can get 3 or 4 and 5. And if they got a different top laner, like, they potentially could have pushed really hard for the 3. Was that something on you guys' mind?
No. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm aiming for 1st because I'm paid in compensation for like how far we win, right? Because that's like always performance-based pay is something that I believe in fully for players, and so I take that on as a coach as well. I'm not going to be the one who like doesn't try hard to win and then gets paid anyway.
But as an org, like 3 and 4 is so different due to Worlds.
Like our policy as an org was to try to make sure that we could succeed in summer split and then also in the off season of this season, right? To put ourselves in a position where we can like make an impact that like what Team Liquid did, where they built the first year and then they built even off of their signed players like even better in the off season. So that isn't something like the roster they have this year isn't something you can put together in an off season. You have to do that by going halfway and then succeeding and then going the rest of the way. And that's definitely the model that I was like, this is smart, you know, what Steve is doing.
And what TL did was also very synonymous with franchising though. Like that was the only period where you could do it because so many players were on the market. I don't think there will ever be an off season like 2018 off season.
Which is why we're doing it on a much smaller scale than Team Liquid, and also why I'm doing Moneyball with Darshan, because I think the same thing about him that I did about Power Evil. Like he's a very emotionally charged player, and that means that like the environment that he's training in and the passion with which he has to throw into the game affects the outcome of his season like tremendously. And I think that like when he's in the environment that he has now, where he has Hope and he has Irene and he has, you know, somebody like me around to talk to hopefully on his bad days, and he has like somebody to reboot the relationships between him and his team members consistently, and he's like really like focused in on what's going to win us the season. I think that we can do super well with him. I'm really psyched about that.
Well, speaking a little on Power Beeble, I think Power Beeble was a really great pickup for you guys, and I think you guys are super dependent on Power Beeble. I think stats show it, like in-game play shows it. I think Power Beeble is probably the 2nd or the 3rd best one-man carry force. I would put number 1 to
Is
probably.
That only because he's been on bad teams?
Maybe so. So I think Doublelift is probably the best player. You give him 4 average players, and Doublelift could carry this team harder. I don't think Power Beeble is better than Bjergsen or Jensen, but I think Power Beeble is better than both Bjerg and Jensen at one-man carrying 4 average players.
I don't know about that. I think he might have gone too far. Here's the thing. I'll give him credit. Go on, Weldon.
I think that I would disagree with that in terms of like raw gameplay, but if you include off the Rift stuff, like in terms of like team, I think I understand now why some of his rosters have had the kind of like growth success while others have like capitulated and like fallen off, and it's because he's like a really good teammate and he's really good at pulling learnings out of things and like making points really concise and being like, okay, this is what we learned from this 10-minute like Fiesta argument in the post game, and this is what we need to focus on in the next game, and like being a good teammate and like keeping the environment chill, you know, no matter winning or losing, and giving people the long-term vision and be like, hey guys, this is happening too. And then at the end of the season I solo killed Faker, you know, in Worlds, so just believe in it, you know, like, so like he's really, I think that once I saw the soft skills, I was like, I'd be more willing to make a claim like what you just claimed. But I think that the leadership that somebody like Soren has, like on the Rift, when he's like, you know, ahead in his lane, is pretty crazy. He's super going to be in the face, pulling all the resources on the team to him and just like Peter, just like Double Lift.
Maybe
pulling the resources to him aggressively.
Maybe with recency bias, because Bjerg played with star-studded rosters recently, and Pirate Evil played on non-star-studded roster. Like, Bjerg did carry the hell out of 2014, 2015 TSM, but I can definitely make that claim over Jensen. I think Jensen's a better player than Pirate Evil, but I think Pirate Evil is a better one-man carry than Jensen. He's way up there. He's at least number 3
this is the problem, though, with the argument, right? It's like Weldon said there, like, you are kind of comparing apples and oranges, because Jensen played his entire career on a pretty talent-stacked set of Cloud9 lineups, so really his job wasn't solo carry. His job was like, right, we've got a whole team set up, be the best mid laner where you can be, and that's how we're going to win the game. Power of Evil was often in, like, makeshift or like weird lineups. Like, what's funny is the best lineup on paper he ever played in was his one that was an abject failure. It was the Orion lineup where he got all the legends and all these great players, and he was terrible in that lineup. And if anything, that's what I would have said. That's why I wanted to pick up when you said you saw him as like a solo carry, because it's like, that's like, if you're judging him only on that dimension, he might look good, but like, there's, to be a top player, you also have to have the other aspect.
Yeah, but that's what I'm judging him on. I'm telling you, like, in that aspect, in being a solo carry, he's one of the best in the league.
Yeah, but I think that also implies some of his flaws as a player, though. Like, for me, Power of Evil, the reason why I didn't like it, actually, where you flamed him with his builds, this is why I took umbrage with you doing that, Loco, where the thing that you didn't like was that he had all these off-kilter builds that other people didn't do. To me, that is, if I was the coach of Power of Evil, I would tell him nothing about that. I would tell him, keep doing that. Because it's clear to me from seeing all the interviews with him, and crucially over his career, how many of those like off-meta builds have become like his go-to approach. And in fact, the amount of times I've seen him have a weird build that no one else knew what he was doing, but what he did was, it turned out that made one matchup that wasn't supposed to be good for your particular pick workable. Like, you could make it work in this one way because no one else was playing against that. So the person playing the matchup was thinking, right, I have these advantages that they didn't. And so what I'm getting at here is, for me, Power of Evil is a player who can be a pretty good mid laner if he has like his own comfort, like what he knows what he's going to do, he knows how it's going to work. In this particular case, he sometimes even has like an informational advantage on the enemy. That's pretty good. It's pretty hard to get that edge in League of Legends, Local. Like, not many players in the world can do that. So like, the problem with that is you got to have a team that lets you do that. I would imagine, this is speculation entirely on this part, I would imagine when he went to Orion, they just thought, right, we're all fucking sick players, mate. We've been to like top 4 worlds, we won LCS stuff. You just do your job, like, you just do whatever you want. Like, oh, what's going wrong? Like, we picked that. That's the best global meta champion. Well, we picked it for you. Why didn't you carry? And it's like, that's not who he is, mate.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
I mean, I think that's one, like, if you look at the difference between Bjergsen and Jensen, it's like Jensen did everything that he did while demanding like mostly counter picks.
Yes.
Or last picks or exposed picks, whereas Bjergsen like was blind picking like a massive amount of his career when he was successful too. And so when I say massive, I mean obviously for mid lane massive.
Yes.
I don't mean like massive as far as for support or jungle, but like that I feel like is super impressive because he was winning matchups that should have been counter matchups. I remember just what Doran was saying about like having information about a matchup that makes it like play differently. We had this when Vlad was in the meta and Anivia was being picked as the counter, and Storm was just like, don't worry, I'll win this one too, And so we're like, okay, so we let him get counter picked, and then he like solo killed Pobelter, I think it was, and then Pobelter interviewed after the game was like, yeah, we thought it was a counter because I guess we just weren't playing against Bjergsen,
And by the way, I'll even say that's. Oh yeah, go on, finish your point, mate.
I think I was done.
All right, sorry. Well, but anyway, the point I was going to make on that was, like, that's also why it's so hard to judge people from the scoreboard or like damage stats. Because in this analogy that Weldon gave there, example, in that particular scenario, it depends what your team makeup is. Like, actually, Jensen, bearing that he had all these amazing players on his team, was probably doing the right thing for Jensen and for Cloud9. He's saying, right, give me the best mid lane matchup you can give me. And all my job's going to be is I'm just going to play the fuck out of this mid lane. I'm going to be, obviously, he was a famously amazing laner if you gave him the good picks. And that will be how I'll win the game for you. Whereas Bjergsen, especially at different points in his career, like there was obviously some bad TSM lineups. In that scenario, when he's blind picking, first of all, like he's freeing someone else up to get the pick that they want. So now he has to go for a harder matchup to give his teammate a better match. Like it's so hard if you don't know internally what the priority of what they were trying to pick and these sorts of factors to actually judge the person's performance in that sense, especially when we're comparing two people who play with totally different teammates and against different opponents in certain senses,
Yeah, I
The
mean,
variables are crazy on that.
As a side note, that's one of the things that triggers me about TSM fans screaming that they should just put Bjergsen on Akali all the time, because like one of the best ways that we used Bjergsen in 2016 was to win unwinnable matchups to free up the counter pick for some other position. Because it had the biggest impact on the map. You know, we'd pick him the champ that like would let us counter pick another lane, and then he would win anyway. You know, it was just disgusting. It was so useful because he was put so much time into the matchup that he would just find all these like special ways to do it. And that's what I love about Power of Evil, is like what you said, that discovering all those builds represents the work ethic that he puts into trying to figure out how to do that. And there's so many other players I've run into who just like scrims are over and they're like, okay, a couple hours of autopilot solo queue and go to bed and wake up and go back at it. And they're not like trying to think, how can I do something different than everybody else in the world to become the best in the universe at this? You know, they don't have the audacity to even dream of that, so they're terrified to bring a new build on the stage.
Just to tag on that quickly, Loco, I will just say there's one last detail in terms of the build aspect of Power Evil.
This is like listen Thorin now.
This is all you need to know, mate, is that there were a couple of times, I think it was in Season 5, like when he was on Unicorns of Love, where Power of Evil literally invented new builds that made champions viable that Faker the following week copied. That is a real thing. You can go back and check it. Faker himself saw the actual VOD. Yeah, or everyone else just banned it after that. That's real. Let me know which Western player ever did that.
Genja was Trinity. JK. So what is it? The after practice thing is something I want to touch on. Like, I coach so many players where they're like, you force us to work too hard, or like, this is too much. Like, we scrim 3 blocks. Like, we're working extremely hard. And here's the reality for all these LCS players. Maybe if some of them are watching, everyone scrims double blocks. Everyone scrims 3 blocks. If you do that, you're doing the bare minimum for an LCS player. Scrimming 2 blocks or scrimming 3 blocks, you're doing the bare minimum for LCS players. And often enough, you scrimming 2 blocks, you scrimming 3 blocks, compared to the top tier LCS pros, where they watch the replays, they watch like the meticulous details, they're putting in 100% focus, and they're not tuned out during VOD reviews, and they're actually putting in the work. Like, there's a difference in that. But where I see so much of the difference is like after scrims, like people talking to other pro players, like talking about this matchup, like playing the 1v1s, like researching the builds, like going back and watching. Like, I force players to take notes on the replays and force players to like review and watch. Some players like just do the bare minimum and they type in one-liners, and some players like put in the extra work, and it really, really, really shows. Like, players
write that down. Thanks for the advice.
And it really shows. Like, someone that I knew was going to be good again, and someone that I knew was putting an insane amount of work, was Centauran. It wasn't a surprise to me when Centauran went to FlyQuest and he started doing really well. When I was coaching him on Goldcoin United, like all the extra stuff like that I told him to do, he did every single one of the extra stuff. And a lot of times for other players, like I would have to be like, yo, for this top lane matchup, I talked to player X, Y, and Z, and this is how you can better this top lane matchup. Or at level 4, you can do this, or like push out 2 waves and you can go buy this item and it's better. And then they would do it after like I gave them the information. Centauran's someone that was like, oh, Loco, what do you think if I did this for this jungle matchup? Oh, can you ask this Korean jungler about this jungle matchup? Can you talk to Rainover about this path thing? Like, I'm not too close with Rainover. Can you introduce, like, there's players that go out of their way and put in the extra effort, and it comes a lot from what you do after. Because a lot of people are like, well, being a pro is hard. You have to practice 10 hours a day, and after those 10 hours, like, you can go out, you can go play Fortnite, you can go play brainless solo queue. It's the ones that put in the effort, like, that makes it really different. Like, we talked about talent so much earlier in the episode.
So what about Thorin's point that there's all these players that don't do that and then they just win world?
There's not all these players. There's not all these players. It's 1 or 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's not all these like magical players that can play less than other people and do well. And even all these magical players that can play less than other players and do well, like, they're just skimping themselves. They could play more. They could spend that time and be even better players than they are. It's getting to the like getting closer and closer to your maximum potential as possible. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I definitely, though, have had a lot of players who are like, oh, I was on this one team and we were just winning everything because we were just so much better than every other team. I didn't have to do all this studying and all this grinding and all this stuff. And I feel bad because it is true, but I feel like it's a little bit of a team thing. Like, you have that team of like 5 people that like you don't have to do that stuff afterwards, but if you're not on that team when the season starts and there's no chance of you being on it, then you're like, oh, I'm resigned to another season of like putting in maximum effort more than These are their god teams, and like I'm probably not going to beat them at the end of the season.
And that's the truth of the situation. Like you have to
Yeah,
deal
it's
with
just
like the
reality.
cars. Like people on TL, of course they have to practice a lot less. They're fucking auto chess players. Like holy shit, they play so much fucking auto chess, and that's fine. They're TL. But if someone was like, if let's say a jungler from a bottom tier team like talk to their coach like, well, Xminty plays a lot of auto chess. Xminty doesn't have to do this. Why are you fucking forcing me? Why are you telling me to do all this stuff when Xminty doesn't do that and TL's having when TL's
That
having
was one of our goals from last week with the meta change.
Mm.
Use your network of people to research all the picks.
when TL's doing all this or TL's not doing all this, why do we have to do it? Because you're not fucking TL, because your AD isn't Doublelift, your mid laner isn't Jensen, and to catch up to TL and to even survive, like you're gonna have to put in extra work. Like it's
Can't we just wait until the patch hits and then it resets everything?
sure.
We don't have to work as hard.
TL probably has more analysts, TL probably has more people, and TL has way more experienced players where they've been in similar patches before where we're a lot newer and we're going to have to put in the extra work. Dude, if you're trying to get to the top, you're going to have to put in more work than people at the top to actually even climb.
To some degree, yeah. As a general rule, that'd probably be a pretty good principle, sure. The thing is, I also think there's like a hidden aspect as well. Like this is going to be mainly centered around like how an individual player improves. That is so overlooked. Like I know so many pro players who, first of all, they literally think of themselves as like you wouldn't. I'm not joking. If I think of all the pro players I've been friends with over the years, the amount of I would probably say like 99% of them think of themselves in a static fashion as like I am a really good player at League of Legends, and so their worst problem is when they're actually bad. They're not bad. It's like, well, no, I'm a really good player at League of Legends. So like something else is going wrong here. Like, you know, the meta is wrong.
Growth mindset versus fixed mindset.
They really seem to think that once they like, they
or
think
just
it's like
denial.
They think it's like they get a badge in scouts. It's like, right, I've completed laning, got that one. I've got the macro badge. It's like you don't. You have to refresh that all the time, mate. So first of all, you do have to work on even your fundamental basic skills that you're already good at, or to continually to maintain and improve them. But then this is probably the worst aspect, I think, that is still very lacking in the West. I don't know what it's like in Korea, is the amount of Westerners who refuse to work on their weak points is amazing. Like they actually really would almost try to convince you that like, no, but I'm so good in this area. They seem to think it's worth putting all their effort into like the 1% improvement in their best area than the gaping hole of where they're terrible, where actually, you know, like even like a week of working on that would give
if
them,
you
like,
think I'm bad at tanks, why don't you let me just play carries? Why are you forcing me to learn tanks if you think I'm bad at tanks? I don't understand. You think I'm bad at tanks? Why are you forcing me to play tanks? Ridiculous.
All right, I need to run and use the restroom really bad because I had a whole bunch of tea before this. And then I think this show has been very jovial so far, and I feel bad for all the people who came here to see blood fly.
Well, then bring some
Maybe
fire
when we get back.
When you get back,
we can
let's
dig
talk
into some
CLG.
spicy topics.
Let's talk
All right.
CLG when you get
Sorry,
back.
but I'm really
Yeah,
sorry.
go
I drank
ahead.
so much tea to be wired for this, and then I just like now I really have to pee. I'll be right back. Apologies to the audience.
Doran, I mean, for example, isn't one of your favorite players like someone like Froggen who gets a lot of criticism for early game priority and being proactive and like shot calling and playing to like give its lead to other lanes? Isn't that an example of a Western player and not fixing their like mistakes or what they're weak at? Because Froggen's still extremely good at what he's good at, team fighting.
I actually personally think though that that's like not a great example, because here's the thing about Froggen, and anyone who's watched like all of his career will know this, is that like the idea, for example, that Froggen can't like play assassins and like roam and be super aggressive early is nonsense. Like you can literally watch him do that on his stream very often, and you can, in fact, and here's the mad thing. He even does it occasionally in pro play. But unfortunately, I have to tell you, I think he does it in pro play mainly as a way of being like, see, I can do that, and then goes back to his old shit. So I've always thought his biggest two problems as a player is, one, he really just like, this isn't necessarily so negative. It's kind of like the Power of Evil example. He has like his own niche that he went along. And here's the part everyone forgets about Loco, is everyone says now, well, all Froggen's doing, anyone could do that, just play passive and just farm and be like good in the team fight. It's like Froggen invented that. Are you actually aware of that? Like, he invented that style of play. So, of course, the person who invented what everyone else copied at one point in time is going to still think, well, I can be at like the edge of the cutting edge of that field, and I can be better at doing it than other people. And to some degrees, he can be at certain players. Still a lot of Western players that can't learn as well as he can, can't always make off-meta picks, make it to the team fight stage. But that's one flaw he has. And then the other flaw, and this is why I actually thought the Jensen versus Bjergsen example was good earlier, is I think Proggen's number one flaw, Loco, is that he does a terrible job networking with other players in the game to get on good teams. Like, I'm not exaggerating. If you go out there and ask pro players that you know who are mid laners if Froggen's a good player, and I guarantee you most of them will say he's very minimum in the top half in the LCS. But you know what his problem is? First of all, he does it because he thinks to himself, well, if I'm a good player, people should want to play with me. That's a terrible logic to have. That's like the example we gave earlier of if you did a great piece of content, you didn't market it correctly. And then the other part would be, he's also somewhere, if you ever read interviews, he doesn't seem to ever acknowledge he was ever on a bad team. He always talks as though like, we didn't practice as well as we could have, like it didn't transition from like scrims to the stage. And again, that bizarrely, I think comes from confidence. He really thinks if you just put people in the server and they do their job, then he'll win the game. But like, that's not League of Legends, mate. Like I learned a long time ago, you have to network and get in the best team if you want to be the best player.
And for sure, I mean, any team game, any team sport, you have to network. I mean, in League of Legends, networking is so important because it's an information collection game. Whoever has the most information is going to be ahead. Anyways, okay, so going to CLG topic. Well then, here's my criticism for CLG, and I'll start with the entirety of it, and we can go piece by piece. You guys promised us 10-man roster. We're gonna be running 10-man roster. I think that was an absolute failure. And when you guys were attempting to do a 10-man roster, like a lot of teams in NA, it didn't work out, and you guys went straight to just going back to 5-5. That's criticism number one. The 10-man roster thing was just full of bullshit. Criticism number two. You guys are so...
Wait, do I go one by one, or do I have to hold...
let me give the list, and then we can tackle one by one.
Okay.
Second one is, you guys are super reliant on Pyre Evil. I think Pyre Evil is... If MVP was actually who was most valuable to their team itself, I think Pyre Evil would win it. I think without Pyre Evil, CLG would be 9th, 10th, around that era. Or around those placing, and Pyre Evil just bumps it up so much due to how much better he's at team fighting, how much he's better at laning than the other mids. Like, he's a top tier mid. I feel like CLG is a bottom tier team with a top tier mid, and Pyre Evil covers up a lot of the weakness. And for the actual in-game stuff, you guys aren't proactive early. You guys basically do nothing and scale to the late game and win off of having better late game than other teams.
Yeah, they're an NALCS team, we're aware.
Yeah, you are quintessentially an NALCS team, and you're very, very reliant in draft for Sion and Tom Kench, and without both of them, it's really hard for you guys to win games.
All right. Where do we start? Number one,
let's go.
10-man roster. Oh, the 10-man roster worked great. You guys didn't see how tilted Darshan was in the preseason with us losing all the scrims. Like, we had to hard sub him out. Just to like even make like the week that we subbed him out, we made the most progress of any week in training for the entire preseason. And then he turned it around phenomenally, and the state that he was in at the beginning of the season would never have happened if we weren't able to sub him out.
I honestly, like, not to be brutal, if that's true, then I feel pretty bad for Darshan, because I think the showing he's had in the early part of the season, like the early half or the early 4 weeks, isn't great at all. So if he was doing worse before that, then
okay, we'll get into that in part 3, but I think that actually it's not as bad as you think it's on stage, or at least from the sample size.
Like Loco, essentially, you do realize what he just was. Like, it wasn't like when they said it to 10-man roster, they didn't promise they were really going to use all 10 players and always swap them in. What they essentially communicated to their own team is you have to compete for your spot. If you want to get your spot, you are not just a starting player.
No,
it sounds like it was for the team as much as everyone else.
I think they communicated that every week they would have an assessment of the players, and the best 5 players would play.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I just said.
And so far, we are playing the teams against each other, and we're also assessing the players, and we're fielding. I feel like Kevin, like Fallen Bandit, like worked. Like Galen, like Moon is an amazing shot call, and Wiggly is learning to shot call. So I wanted to see who was going to shot call better on stage, because Moon was shot calling a lot better in practice. than Wiggly was. On the other hand, like Fallen Bandit was helping us be a lot more productive in terms of training than Darshan, and then like well, to be perfectly honest, Darshan was super stressed, right? He just went through an off season where he considered me traded, you know, and like he knew that he was part of the process. You know, I can't. I'm not a person that can like hold things privately. That's why it's so hard to do interviews like this, because like I need to like keep secrets, but like it's really tough for me. I'm just like really open. So like I wasn't going to go through an off season where I was like attempting to trade a player but not telling them, right? So I had to be open with him that like these are the people we're looking at and this is why. And that was really stressful for him, and I'm sure that he was burnt out by putting in so much effort in the off season to prove that he was worthwhile. So I don't think it's not normal at all that he was burnt out when the preseason kicked around and, you know, lacking sleep and was underperforming. But I'm just glad that we had a sub so that we could, you know, train really well, and that Fallen Bandit was basically LCS-ish caliber. So like it was high quality training, and he was winning the matchups he should have in scrimmages, so we weren't inting the early game so that we could actually train, right? So
well, wait, before you go on,
the roster functioned perfectly till then, and then I agree with you. The last 3 weeks, I've been struggling to see how to use it at all.
Okay.
Because it's really clear in training that like the people that we invest in LCS practice are the people who are going to get better faster. So like if we picked Moon, he'd probably be improving, right? But we picked Wiggly, and now he's improving too fast. And like Wiggly and Moon is training with the academy squad, so he's not able to like push, right? So like it's for
basically
me
the principle for why so few teams ever got relegated from the LCS. Like even if they were the worst LCS team, they were still better than the best challenger team, right? So
I feel super pressured to try to figure out how to make that work better. And I have some ideas, and we're definitely gonna like work on it. But like it's a big problem.
I mean,
not gonna lie.
The biggest problem is if you invest time into figuring out who the best 5 is on stage, right? Then you're gonna have to do mixed practice. You're gonna have to do some kind of mixed version of rosters to see like, oh, when in isolated setting, like actually Fallen Bandit is better than Darshan. Actually, Moon is better than Wiggly. But if you do mixed roster practice, then you're not prepping that well for LCS, so you're wasting time into figuring out who the best 5 is instead of trying to win for the weekend. So I thought the 10-man roster thing was doomed from the start.
Well, so the way that we're trying to do that is in the third block, right, where we're scrim with one player swapped out for the other team, and we can see them. We can see our team without that player, and we can see our team with, or we can see that player like in the new team, right? So we get a little bit of data on that, but yeah, it's like late night scrims are not really indicative of. Actually, we're trying it different this week. Actually, for the first time, we're copying C9. So C9 basically has a day a week where they scrim their academy team like during the day, and so we're gonna copy that for a week or two and see how it goes. Scrim during the day, like daytime blocks, when we can have higher focus. We'll see.
Plus, the thing is, I don't think it's like one or the other, Loco. They're not doing the extreme of one. Like, if anything, I actually think that approach of like trying different players and actually mixing the roster is actually a great way to improve. Like, one of the things that I know they do with subs in Korea is that's a clever way to make a player who is a starter play differently and practice differently. So like here's a really obvious example. Say you have a mid laner who's a really good mid laner, but he's only a really good mid laner because he has a sick aggressive jungler who always camps his lane, always sets up his lane for him, always makes sure the other jungler can never be there. And that's what allows this guy to play aggressively. But you want him to learn to sometimes play a bit more conservatively when the jungler has to be elsewhere. Great way to do that is put in a sub jungler who isn't the type of jungler like that. And he now has to practice, and even though it's just practice, he's still going to try and play properly, but what's going to happen is naturally in the game is he's going to be forced to that route. I mean, an example Monty actually gave years ago, and I'll actually reveal it now, because Monty once gave an example on Summoning Insight, which he couldn't say because he'd seen the scrim environment. He didn't want to say which player it was. But actually it was Imp from Samsung White. Used to be like way too aggro with his positioning at a time when people used to play like more, you have to play further back. And so what they did on his team was his coach just made him play Cogmore like every game, because the idea was that you had no escapes. If you fucked up like he did and went super aggro, you just got punished all day long. And even though in the actual game he wasn't going to play Cogmore, when he would play the other champions, he would have this in mind. Like, he trained himself through what he'd done in the practice to do that.
Great in practice, great in theory. Actuality in LCS and actuality in NA. Why the fuck are you making me play this shit? Oh my god, it's such a waste of time.
I'll tell you why, Loco. Yeah, okay, you're the player, right? Here's why, mate. Because on the one hand, I'm trying to train you to be good for the LCS match, but 100% of the practice isn't for that. I'm also trying to train you to be a better player so that in the future you're a better player and you're going to be good at Worlds. There you go.
What is it?
Yeah.
And you can talk... You can talk logic, but that's not what gets through.
No, because isn't the entire problem of NA that they constantly focus on the next day of LCS, the next match?
No, Thorin is right, and so is Loco. This is the problem, is that was my philosophy as well, what you said, Thorin, which was like, if I sub out this player, then the teammate will stop getting his weakness covered by the benefit of the other player. And then that person will have his weakness exposed and then have to deal with it. And it happened. But we lose games on the weekend because we can't work as a team to cover each other's weaknesses. So it's like something that I would want to do when there was no season on the line with which to get into playoffs for, because it's
which
like
is a catch-22, obviously.
Yeah. So like I was like, great. So now the preseason's over and I can't do that anymore. So now what do I do? Now I'm in the middle of the season and we're like, we have to win this weekend's games. And I can't really like saying, oh, we're aiming for the summer split is all nice, but in reality, I have a corporation that owns the team that wants results now, and that's always the case. Players need results, and like I want to win. So yeah, I just have to balance winning and try to figure out like how to do the sub system better. Yeah. But it worked really well in the preseason, at least, and in the first 2 weeks of the season, and that's because Moon is so good and Darshan is so good at responding to criticism, and like he's flying now. Oh, we can get to that point in point 3 when I make sure that everybody knows that Darshan isn't crap, even though I threw him under the bus just now with that like commentary. But
I think most people would say Darshan's probably bottom 3 LCS top laner.
And he definitely is when he picks nerfed Aatrox into Urgot.
Or like, I honestly like
very extreme circumstance, obviously.
It's kind of weird that I have to be the.
I think that he's a worse red side Aatrox player into Urgot than Hanser is a blue side Urgot player into red side Aatrox.
Yeah. But sure. as a player, like you have a decision to opt into red side Aatrox into blue side Urgot. You have so many options, and I'm not sure how exactly where your draft works. Like combination of Irene, you, and Darshan decided that was the best.
Wait, what was the second point? Because I think the draft was the third point.
Second point is you guys are super heavily reliant on Power Beeble.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that. He's really freaking good.
I great pickup. I mean, you guys picked him up fair and square, but I think without Power Beeble, CLG would be.
We're just gonna try
bottom
not to
9th and 10th
this year. Mm-hmm. We're just gonna try to like have results that'll make him happy that he signed with us.
Well, moving on to the third point, the way you guys playing, I mean, very stereotypical NA team, and a lot of heavy criticism on Darshan when he's not on Sion, and Biofrost when he's not on Kench.
Yeah, so first of all, we're not training that way. Mm-hmm. We're training to try to be good at proactive early game snowballing. Mm-hmm. But when you pick a comp to win on the weekend and they give you free scaling, mm-hmm. And like the easiest chance to do it with, it's like kind of a crime not to take the free win. Right? But you don't. It's not like you need to practice Sion, or like winning a lane with Tom Kench. Like you win that lane, he wins so many lanes and like nullifies so many champions. They picked 2 champions or 3 champions that are countered by Tom Kench. You're like, all right, so I'm gonna pick Tom Kench again this game because you didn't ban it. So like, okay, free win. I mean.
But when you guys aren't able to pick up those free wins, you guys look very, very different from when you are on Sion and when you are on Kench.
So we just got very different. Look,
well, I mean, those
they look
are OP, right? They win the early game and they win the late game. So like, it's really hard to. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. When we get an OP pick, it looks like an easy game.
They're not an OP. I wouldn't say they're OP pick. They're not like hotly contested all over the regions, like where Sion and Tom Kench is picked first round, like every single time. They're picks that hide weaknesses, and they're picks that allow you, like, these are picks that hide weaknesses and make the game easier to play.
Yep.
And I mean, you have to realize Loco right now, the reason he's struggling to get these concepts out is he is still shaken to his very core because he knows that CLG just lost to Golden Guardians, and he thinks Golden Guardians is trash, like they're not good. He's been flaming them every single week, so he's still like, he has to figure you've done something wrong here, Weldon.
No,
I beat Golden Guardians.
Wait, no, I gave credit to Golden Guardians. They did exactly what I thought every single team should do versus CLG. They banned Sion. I would have liked it if they banned Kench also, but they banned Sion. and CLG didn't have a draft to play into Urgot. They gave Urgot for free, and Darshan looked really lost when not on Sion, like he did earlier in the season when he wasn't playing Sion.
Yeah, so we knew early in the week that we were going to be playing into Urgot first pick and that Sion was going to be banned. And we trained to have a matchup into that, and we had 3 options, and we went with the one that we thought was like the most 50-50 because there's really no good picks in Urgot, right? Would you agree with that?
I mean, Sion is the best pick, and then outside of
And
that, like you have to get really, really tricky, and you have to get really creative. I agree.
Yeah, so the best option probably would have been to ban Urgot, but we had confidence from our training that, like, we were training with some decent top laners, and they were losing to, like, we were playing at, fine. The matchup was going the way that it should, and I think there were like 2 bad points that skewed the game here. There was obviously the solo kill death when he didn't have flash and Hanser flashed on him, and then there was when Ray went top lane when they were gonna dive him. So Darshan actually properly backed off turret and was backed off turret. The wave was soaking, and like we were pushing bot, right? And like Wiggly probably, instead of trying to go salvage that situation and then lose the 2v2 and totally throw the game, should have probably gone bot side, right? So you can't really put that one on Darshan completely. He was doing like the right thing, like gracefully losing his matchup, right? But then like it became a 2v2 death because Wiggly was there, and then they decided to fight it. So I don't think that that's we're picking a matchup that's gonna lose a little gracefully unless it gets jungle help, and they were jungle helping top, and we didn't pick our jungle probably well for that top 2v2 because we were picking it for the mid, the bot, if you look at it. So I want to defend Darshan a little bit in that both in the Ornn game and in the Aatrox game, like he was taking it for the comp and trying to pick the best comp pick that we could into those matchups, and like, yeah, didn't show very well because the prep, it didn't go as it was prepared for sure. And it's not like we were like winging it.
Sure.
But
to be fair, you also have to
I would say
mention-
he did get like the players that he faced on stage were better than he expected. And so
you also did last week flame the fuck out of everyone who didn't ban Karthus against Froggen, to be honest, Loco. So that's not even a global power pick at mid lane. So if you do ban him, as CLG did, you are giving up one of your bans.
I think Draven probably would be the argument that we shouldn't have banned Draven. Would be like, everybody's like, why did you ban Draven?
I think, or I just don't, on 9.3 when Cassio got nerfed and Akali got nerfed, I think you should never give Urgot. That was just personal opinion, and also I knew CLG was really reliant on Sion and Kench, and when they started banning Sion and CLG didn't ban Urgot, like that made me really scared for CLG. So I mean,
so I talked more about this than I should have revealed, like in terms of like benefit it's going to bring our opponents to listen to this section, but like I think it's probably better for people to know that so they don't like overly flame Darshan or Irene, because we've just basically Irene had faith in Darshan and Darshan had faith in the training that we had, and then Hanser was just better than he should have been at Urgot into Aatrox for sure. And so now we know, but it's a best of 1, so what can we do? Like, well, obviously if this were a best of 3, we just freaking ban it the second game, like whatever.
Well,
and welcome to NALCS.
Let's move on to more of the LCS teams, and like a big overlying topic that we have for all these LCS teams is, and Weldon, you're someone that works in a team. Why does LCS teams like not putting the work into 1-3-1ing and playing priority picks, and why are so many of the LCS teams like reliant on late game team fight scaling?
Didn't you basically just answer that question earlier where you said that you want them to just practice for the weekend's games and try and win those games against the teams they're going to play? Like, so why would they just completely change their entire philosophy on the game and potentially get worse? Bearing in mind, you have to all know how to correctly do the 1-3-1. Idiots who think it's just the person in the side lane has to know how to win that matchup. They don't. Everyone else has to know where to be on the map.
I'll give a small point and then I'll move it on.
Players actually scrim that way. And then I think they get to the stage and they are too scared. And I feel like it's another, like if I think about our year, like back when we were doing best of 3s, a lot of times the first game was really like, not the first game, the third game was really like a Rammy. And really people like wouldn't take the risks and wouldn't play the seesaw, like the edge of the knife, where like you're doing the 1-3-1 correctly. But in the first 2 games, or at least the second game for sure, like it was a lot more like proper, or like, like aggressive League of Legends and very proactive. And so I think it takes a certain breed of mindset, and maybe it's the players, maybe it's the coaching staff's job, but like I think it's just harder in best of ones to show that, unless you're EU, I guess.
I mean,
But
to be
even
fair,
a lot of the EU teams don't do that well. So it's just some of the best
it's
ones.
mainly just the very best ones. Like, people definitely exaggerate that part. You are right. But okay, here's the obvious question though, Weldon, is
Okay.
surely it'd be ideal to have a coach who even builds himself. He's about mindset and mentality, and that's his background. It's the ideal coach for CLG then, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to get them to do that really aggressively. Stage. I think we'll get there. My envisioning is that, by the end of spring split and into summer, we'll be the team that plays that way.
Okay.
For sure. I really like the knife edge play where you are full court press, like up in one lane, and the jungler shows there, and so you take everything on the other side of the map. And even if that person dies, it's not a big deal because the only thing that person got, and that jungler got back was like a kill, and some tempo, maybe, because you're already pushed. So it's a really fun thing to watch. It's a really fun way to play for the players, and it's a really fun way to win too, because it happens fast and aggressively. So definitely, it's an ideal. And like, I'm not confused. Like, this is an entertainment sport, So we should, when given the choice, try to do the thing that is like a good way to play, but is also entertaining.
Oh.
That builds our brand.
Let's move on to another team, Clutch Gaming. Where did you
Wait
guys?
1 second, Loco. Bearing in mind, we have done this show for quite a while already. You've got to be very efficient with how many teams we talk about now.
Clutch...
Like, I would suggest you pick a couple that you really want to talk about, and then we talk about some other stuff.
Okay, well, I want to talk about Clutch because Clutch is such an enigmatic team, and I feel like everyone has their opinions.
Are they?
Some people had Clutch at top 3, top 4 when the season started.
Okay.
So, yeah, I want to hear Thorin, Weldon, what are you guys' thoughts on Clutch?
Okay, let's run through the roster for everybody listening. Demonte, Piglet, Vulcan,
Lyra, Huni.
Oh, and Huni. Oh, yeah. Wow, Huni. I don't know, man.
Huni gets the Dade award.
I feel like when I see somebody go on stage and start picking their comfort champs outside the meta, you know that they've tilted, right? You know that they're like not having success learning the new meta champs, and they don't know how to win, or they're scared and they've given up. And so you have Froggen, who's just like tried to play for 2 weeks, and then he was like, never mind, I'm gonna go back to Karthus. Which, thankfully, like, could you imagine if that didn't work out, if they lost those games? Oh, I would feel so bad for him, for his mental. But then they won, so like at least now, like, and I noticed in training, like their approach to training is they're still trying to like learn League of Legends, right? But then like when they go on stage, they're like us. They're like, okay, well, we want to win this game, so let's do the thing we know is like a sensible draft this week. Gives us the best shot to win. But that doesn't mean we have to like practice it the whole week. We can try to get good enough to believe that we can pick this other thing, right? But yeah, I don't even know if Clutch is doing that anymore. I don't know if they've just completely given up. We'll see next week. If they go next week and like Piglet picks, what did he used to do when he was on Team Liquid Academy, right?
What did he pick? He loves Israel. He loves Israel. He loves Vayne. Those are his go-to.
Israel, Vayne. Yeah. He went back to his go-tos.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Huni's just playing like, didn't he play like a Rumble already?
Yeah,
2 games?
He was playing Rumble Victor. He was playing Rumble Victor, and on Sunday he picked Sion.
Zillion. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then he picked Sion. So like, I feel like he started off, and he'd already was like, I given up, and then he's trying to play meta, and it's too late, or he's not good enough. I don't know.
I think that team is so done. Like, that team is so mentally checked out. On Saturday,
I never imagined that they were going to be good, but I also had the same impression about Misfits. I looked at the roster and I was like, okay, so a bunch of players who like kind of can't really show like the level of aggression that I would expect out of like a all-star player, and then you stick them all on one team, and like it just feels like they're gonna have like a very Team Liquid style kind of victory or defeat where they just kind of can't, they just get caught out by an aggressive team and then they can't close it because they just fall behind, and they're gonna pick standard. So I felt like the same way when I watched Clutch. I was like, they're gonna pick standard and lose, or they're gonna have to get weird. I don't think their weird is strong enough to win.
I did an interview with Piglet on Saturday where they were 0-1, and he said if we lose on Sunday, I feel like we're out of playoffs. I feel like this split is done. It's still yet to come out.
Sounds like their coaching staff's fucking killing it in that team.
Dude, but that's such an impossible... The only way Clutch could have succeeded was if the coaching staff had more respect, got enough respect from Piglet and Huni where they would be under one direction, and I think that never happened. And
Clutch Gaming Wiki.
Who's
their coaching staff?
Isn't it like Seb Park guy or something? Or is he like
No.
the head of operations or something?
Seb isn't a
Who's the
coach, so it's McCraggs. You guys probably never heard of him.
Okay.
He's
No. Of course I know him. Yeah.
Clutch's academy coach, or he used to be Clutch's academy coach, and he became the head coach. And they have analyst Nazer.
Scrag.
Yeah.
Oh, Empire.
Yeah.
Assistant coach is Baby Zeus. It says.
No. He got let go after last year. He's not on that team anymore.
So Nazer is like their assistant coach.
Or analyst. I'm not sure how many people they have, but that team that was not a cheap roster. Piglet, Huni, and then they also have to get Demonte from Echo Fox. Like that was not a cheap roster. I think that's one of the rosters where the management and the org is looking at it and going like, "What the fuck do we do now?"
Yeah, I knew.
Go on.
I knew Mix. Oh, I was just remarking that I knew Mix Scrag was on the team. I didn't want to disrespect him by saying I didn't know that he was coaching the team, but I wanted to see who else the support staff was, just in case he's watching. I know. I was just talking with you earlier today. I know that you're coaching Clutch. So anyway.
Okay. The thing is, if you look at this team, Loco, like, it's not like these are bad players. Some of these players, like, I reckon if you made a different lineup around them, both Huni and Piglet could be pretty good players at their positions in the LCS. They're probably even on, like, I think they could be even on, like, mid-table teams vying for playoff spots. But actually having both in the same team has completely failed. And Huni especially isn't even Huni. Like, the problem is when you are such a one-dimensional player as Huni is, you have to do the one dimension. You can't then just go, right, I've given up on that. I'm just going to be an average player. Like, if you knew that Huni was going to be the player he is now, you would take Flame in this spot 100%.
Yeah, I mean, you know what?
That would make the rest of the team function, you know.
Clutch would be better with Solo than they would be with Huni right now. Crazy to say, but Clutch would be better with Solo than they would be with Huni right now.
That's wild to think of in the off season. Like,
yeah, of course.
I would definitely, yeah. So why is this roster failing? I guess.
Internal blow up. It has to be internal blow up, and it has to be people disagreeing. Like Piglet and Huni both playing things that you have to be playing towards.
Do you think that they are having issues with each other? So we have 3 Koreans, right? And they're all like arguing with each other. And then you have a coach who is not Korean, right? Mick Scrag is from the US. His name's Brendan. So probably doesn't speak Korean. So I'm just imagining the game ends, the scrim ends. One of the Koreans leans back and be like, mid difference. And the other guy goes like, the support, man, it's just, I don't know, I all in. And then like, I don't even know. That seems really tough to navigate, like a multilingual environment of that team. So hard.
Ideal coach would
Plus,
be...
how are you going to have like fair jungle attention when the top laner and the AD carry are Korean and the jungler's Korean? Like, even if the coaching staff does an amazing job talking to these guys, you're telling me when they go out of the room and as he's saying here, no one knows Korean, and they just start speaking in Korean, they're not saying to each other like, fucking come to my lane next time. Like, I told you to come. Like, forget what he says. We're going to win the game if we do this. Like, of course they are. Come on, man.
So I feel like a team like this needs like a Korean coach.
Demonte
to even work.
Demonte is definitely getting eaten up. And you know how we always talk about, or you know how there's the award in League of Legends, the Dade Award, where you're super hyped and you've failed to perform. I feel like this split, it's going to be Huni winning Dade Award.
So far, but we still have the second round robin left.
This team's mentally checked out. Do you think they'll collect themselves?
Yeah, but don't you think that they reach that point where like you're not trying anymore, and so you're free? And then all of a sudden you play like Piglet played on TLA.
No, I think this team's at a point where they're like, fuck, the season's over. Fuck, whose fault is it?
Yeah, so then they're just gonna do like whatever. They're gonna play super aggressive. They're gonna pick like lane dominant champions, and they're gonna play all aggro, and then they might actually start winning. So they're not gonna be scared anymore. They're not gonna be trying to play normal, you know. And they're not gonna try to be good. They're just gonna go at it.
Another question I would obviously have here, Loco, is like, if you had to guess who the voices and the shot calling element in this team were, who would it be?
Somewhat split between Piglet, Huni, Lyra, right?
I'm gonna say Huni and Demonte, because I've worked with Piglet and he is very focused a lot on mechanics. Maybe he's going to converse like what to do strategically, but he's not going to be like in the macro, right? He's going to be focused. I think he's a very focused player. And DeMonte was one of the most vocal on Echo Fox. I heard from who's that guy that was always on in Arrow?
Yeah.
Didn't he work with him on Echo Fox? Then he went to
in Arrow's on
He's on Golden Guardians now.
Golden Gardens. Yeah. So he was saying DeMonte is like really vocal, like macro, like he's like working himself up to be a shot caller, right? That he's like a good team leader. And then I assume that Hooney is like very vocal, just because when you separated Hooney and Rainover, you saw which of those was the one doing all the talking or all the shot calling.
Man, I don't have much good things to say about this team. I think, we said what we need to say. This team, I think, failed in the off season, like putting together a roster, and they just accounted on so many things working out well for them where they didn't have a solid basis to build off of.
Like, put it this way, the best example I would give is this. If you go in the off-season and you look at the roster for FlyQuest and you look at the roster for Clutch Gaming, and I put a gun to your head and you have to pick the right one that's going to place highest or your life's over.
I wouldn't.
We're all dead.
Yeah.
We're all dead, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's dead. It's no one's fault, by the way. Everyone would be dead.
No.
That's why League of Legends actually I think is one of the most complicated games to analyze in the entire world. Like in Counter-Strike, I'm not exaggerating, mate. If you just showed me the rosters, I could probably guess 75% accuracy who the better team would be.
Yeah, I definitely had FlyQuest way below Clutch looking at this.
Of course, yeah.
But then
you look at them in the server, they're way
at the start. I'm not sure about the end though. I kind of feel like you can count on Piglet a little bit to like not do well in a season because just he's proven over and over again how he can do that. So can't you count on it by now?
That he wouldn't do well?
He'll make the team fail at some point, or maybe he won't make the team fail, but the team he's on will fail. What team has he been on since he won in North America that has succeeded?
He was on the OK Team Liquid one, basically.
The TLI coach with Piglet, we got to third and fourth place match, and we also took CLG to Game 5. I think that was the highest point for Piglet in North America ever since that. Do you guys want to talk about a fun team, a team we can say a lot of good thing about?
Let's do one more team then, because if Weldon wants to bring some fire, then at the end we have to talk about something else, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, between
all of us saying Hooney's not very good, it's not exactly very controversial, is it? Unless Hooney's here.
I tried to say something controversial, which was that Piglet might not do well, and he'll make the team succeed because of proof. But I feel like even then I'm like getting really stressed out because I'm like, that's not very nice. I feel bad for him.
Yeah, it's also not very nice to just keep fucking playing, collecting massive checks, and then just dumpster into your team in the LCS, is it? That's not very nice, is it? So, kind for kind.
I mean, Piglet showed everyone who he is. I don't think we can blame Piglet for this. Like, we know who Piglet is, and we know what Piglet is capable of, and what he's going to give you. It's the people that pick him up.
I will say this. The idea, I'm a big Piglet supporter because I think his actual ability level at League of Legends as an AD carry is still very good. I think he's still a very mechanically strong player. I think if you give him his champions, he definitely can carry the game. But the idea that you're not only going to give him a rookie support, you're going to give him 2 NA rookies. That is just madness to me. I don't know who was roster building and thought that was a good idea. If I'm getting Piglet, I'm only signing Piglet to my team of veterans. I'm giving him Afro and these sorts of people.
Doesn't it look to you like they were like, okay, we ran out of money, so let's just finish this roster?
I don't think this roster is cheap though.
No, but that's the problem.
Yes, I made this point.
We didn't want to run into that same exact problem.
I forget what video this was in, but I made this point. It was when I was talking about how you would build a dream team of NA resident players, basically. And I made the point that I actually think most people have gone the wrong way in League of Legends and LCS, which is like Weldon's saying here. They get they get the money, right? And it's like making a fantasy team. You can only choose so many players. You can't have all the top 5. I'm going to pick this guy as my main guy. I'm going to spend a lot of money on him. I'm going to get this guy. And the problem is, what LCS people do is they go for all the imports first, and then they go, right, we've got our imports. Who the fuck can we just plug into this jungle spot here? Is there any supports that we could add it to the team? It's I would be going the other way. If you look at the people who are actually the most valuable dollar for dollar in the LCS, it's people like Pobelter who are actually the good NA players who can do their role, and then you can put imports. The difference is, if we're talking about scaling people, if you've got 5 really good import top laners, the 5th best guy's probably not that crazy off the first guy, is he?
Yeah, this is really intelligent.
No, but you know how many teams don't do that? They do the opposite.
Start with the native talent.
Like, because the point I made was this: every single really good native talent has been repeatedly let go by their teams, and they continue to succeed. All of them. Like,
I mean, I won't.
Dardoch, Poor Belter. These guys all keep succeeding to some degree, but their teams don't keep hold of it. I would build around these players personally.
I won't say that was not a little bit part of why I'm more optimistic about this roster than other people, because I feel like we did that. Like, we took the best performing bot lane statistically if you account for their standing, like the lowest standing, highest performing bot lane, the NALCS.
That could just mean they got more resource.
No, I watched all the games and listened to them all before I started roster building. So I watched all of this last season's games with comms, and made sure that like they were actually just good.
Okay.
And I feel like we tried super hard to hang on to our bot lane, and we're gonna try to develop a native talent jungler, but we have at least like 2 years sunk in him in terms of like the academy series where he's been learning. So, and then made sure that we had a backup like Moon, who has had success on stage and like can step up and like take that spot, so that we're not stuck with like, let's see that Wiggly like implodes somehow. Sure. Right? So I think we're pretty much thinking this really, like I don't think I put it that intentionally, but that now that I think of it was like that was the roadmap for sure. And then we started.
By the way, on the past episodes, you'll notice, Loco, for this CLG lineup, I have never flamed Weldon for this CLG lineup's performance. And in fact, one of the factors he mentioned there is exactly why. Is like, actually, in a world where Flame was cheaper and you could just sign him, which was basically the plan, that's actually not a bad blueprint for a team. Because think about it, if you even want to put Flame on carries, which you could do in this meta, you would want a bot lane that's played together a long time and is a very stable bot lane and knows what their job is. Like, that would even be like the CLG bot lane. That would be an ideal setup. Now, they couldn't do that. They had everything else set up. And in the end, they had to go with like plan B, which is let's bring Darshan back in to try and make him work. So it's not like the difference is with the Clutch Gaming lineup we just talked about, they had their pick of a lot of players. They thought these players were the best players they could put into this team. CLG was working with like much more limited resources in that respect. So I think it's always unfair to like, it's the reason why like Coach of the Split is the stupidest award in the LCS, because it just goes to someone whose team won the split and was terrible before, and then the coach is really good now. Like that never makes sense to me. You should judge people based on like what they were working with.
Oh, well, we don't have to talk about LCS teams. We can do your topics, Darn. What were the fire topics?
Weldon, come on. What's on your mind, Weldon? What would be an interesting topic to close out with? What would be something spicy?
I have no idea. I just thought it was gonna be. I was just gonna be defending myself like with judo chops the whole show. So, but.
The problem with that, Weldon, is like I'll go ahead and say this now. After seeing the debate you had with Kelsey and seeing the way you've replied when people try to like ask you hard questions in air maze, I just know that would be a waste of time. Like, it wouldn't actually be as entertaining as people think it would be. Because, for example, like I'm not saying this is flame, but it's just your tactic that you use. It's actually a very smart debate tactic, by the way, which is what you do in a debate if you want to win a debate, is no matter what the other person says, you address it initially, and then you steer the conversation back to your area of expertise, which is not their area of expertise. And then you go deep into that, and then either the other person's so naive that they just follow your lead and go into your area, and they're just going to get wrecked all day long there. Like, they're not going to know the study you talked about. They're not going to have had experience doing this. They're going to speculate, but you're going to be like, well, actually, I did coach that player. Like, it's too easy to beat people doing that. Or they're just going to try again to pull it away, and then you go, well, that's interesting, because that reminds me of when I coached, and then you bring it back again. So the problem with that is, it's like, it's not actually very interesting to watch. Like, it wouldn't be as fire as people think. So is there any like topic that's a controversial one we could talk about?
Well then, so in the past, you said you wanted to be a
debate. I don't feel like it was a debate at all, really.
It wasn't. Like, it was really like you and LS just got together and double teamed.
I thought LS was going to proxy it so we could have a conversation, but then it ended up just being like him arguing against her.
Here's the flaw, LS.
And I was like, I like you, LS, but like I expected you to be a little bit of a neutral party, and then it's just turned into a 2v1, and I was like, there's
the problem.
So awkward.
Fair enough that you admit that, but I will say this, Weldon. I know one of the people that was suggested for that debate was me as the moderator.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was one of the people that was put forward. So I will say this, like, maybe you just didn't know LS would do that, but like, unfortunately, he has basically the same perspective as you on that topic. So it was a bad idea to have him as the moderator. Like the moderator can't just be agreeing with you and then also take up your case. Like, yeah, actually, Weldon. Another thing, Kelsey, is like he wasn't even moderating. He was just another member of the debate.
Also, if you want
Just agreed.
Objective, neutral mediator, I don't think LS fits any of those adjectives.
I mean, he just approached me to do it, so I think that was just my assumption. Yeah.
Okay. Well then, something a little spicy. In the past, I remember you said you didn't want to just be like a sports psych, like you wanted to be a gameplay coach, right?
By the way, he never would say he'd be a sports psych. He would say sports psychology trainer.
Correct.
Correct in the gameplay stuff.
No, you are legally not allowed to call yourself a sports psychologist if you have not done a degree in sports psychology or something, right? It's because it's actually in theory. Remember, psychologists like a form of therapy, so you have to actually, like, as far as I know, legally say trainer, right?
Okay. So in North America, you have to get a
I know
PhD.
my shit, Loco.
You have to get a PhD in clinical psychology to use the word psychologist.
Okay.
So most sports psychologists are people who are like psychologists and then got interested in sport and then became therapists for sports teams and then became like kind of like the person that the sitting in the office that the basketball player goes to once a week. But then sports psychology trainers who were like on the sports side and coaches and wanted to get into the mental side of the game just like studied sports psychology and not therapy and clinical psychology.
Yes.
So because I don't want to go to school for 6 years so that to learn clinical therapy so that I can never deal with sick people. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I just want to work with athletes. So, but that term is legally protected. You can't use the word psychologist unless you can deal with clinical issues in any developed country. So don't say psychologist when you're talking about me.
So you wanted to be a sports psychology trainer.
Yeah.
But not only that, you wanted to do gameplay coaching also, right?
Yeah. I mean, that developed when I was hanging out with you at Team Liquid. I feel like.
Well, it's more than that, actually, because, Weldon, I'll refresh your memory. You actually did say in an AMA or some sort of a post years ago, I remember reading this, like, you didn't, like, here's the thing. If you just said, like, I'm going to be the head coach, but I'm going to be the coach who coaches, like, I'm doing coaching techniques, and I have, Path, for example, and he's the genius about the game. He knows all this stuff. He's going to feed me the gameplay stuff, and then I'll work that through the prism of my techniques to the players, right? Most people would probably say, sounds like that would be a great setup. You would be good for that. But you have definitely said in the past, like, you just straight up flamed all the coaches. I remember one time you said, like, that there was, like, aside from Path, you thought, like, all the strategic coaches were pretty much crap and that they were just a bunch of 20-year-olds, like, dancing around. They thought they had all the answers. They had almost no answers, Players just coached themselves pretty much and ignored the coach. And as a result, you did literally say that, like, you would coach world champions. Like, you set a pretty big stand out front, on that one, right? So you obviously have aspirations.
Stand by that statement.
And you did also say
when I was
you've been playing
of,
MOBA for like 17 years or something crazy last, right?
When I was looking at all the other coaches in the NACL, so when I said that, I think that like none of them were even like as high ranked as me at the game, or had spent as much time studying the game or analyzing the game or learning from other pro players.
Who were the coaches at that point? I was one of them.
When did I say it?
I would guess it was in like 2015 when you first came in. I think it's early on.
No. It was, so because I started out and I was like I was like, I'm going to stay in my lane.
I think it would be 2016 when you were on TSM.
And then I started coaching CLG, and then I started coaching around all of the like consulting, so I was coaching on all of these teams, and I was like, wait a second, these coaches don't know anything about the game. Like, I know more of them about the game than them. Like, not you, Loco. You were one of the exceptions, right? There were exceptions, but like I was just like, Jesus, like I would be a better coach than this guy, because I started out trying to be like, okay, I'm gonna stay in my lane, I'm gonna go to college, and then I was like, why? I mean, I just felt bad for the players, to be honest. That's why I started pursuing that, and also ambition. I was like, "Holy shit! Like, I can do this? Okay, sure. If this is the bar, like, I'm over it, so I'll step over it.
It still would have been. It still would have been like people like Skara, people like Tony. Who else would have been coaching back then? 2016.
So I think there was like history teacher. Skara had already quit. No, this is 2016, like spring split.
Okay.
So Skara was gone.
So like it'll be like Dylan, Tony, history teacher.
Right. So Tony, I thought, was like a facilitator coach. He was an analyst who was like a pretty high ranked player, and then started analyzing, and he was facilitating the players. And they let go of the sports coach guy, Chris, and then he became the head coach. And I was like, okay, I guess that's gonna work. I had like a not great severance from CLG at the point. Like, you know, we like did really well that split, and I was working with them intensively. And then they got to like the week before finals, and they were just like, nope, we don't need you anymore. They didn't hire me again for another hour. So I didn't get to go to. They didn't work with me leading up to finals or worlds. And then they just hired some like guy, like a lifting coach to be their like sports psychology trainer for the next season. But I was like, I think Tony is like, you know, he knows his stuff about the game, and he's got Aframu, so at the very least, like they're gonna figure it out. And then I worked with you and a bunch of other teams. So
Renegade was one of the ones you worked with. Did you work with Immortal?
Ember. You worked with Ember. Let me think. Who else was there? You have to remember the teams that existed back then. That's the problem in Alpha Mart and the LCS anymore.
Energy a little bit. I feel like I worked with Bren for a few days. So
that would have been Charlie coaching. Okay, I'll give you that.
Charlie, right? So Charlie, Hermes, you, Tony. Oh, and then who was on TSM? Oh yeah, Woodbuck.
Briefly for like 4 weeks or whatever.
Woodbuck, and then
Path.
Yeah, but not at the time, right? He was stepping out, trying to let Woodbuck do it. And then in the EU,
G2 obviously.
There's Fnatic. No, G2 wasn't even. They were Gamers 2.
Oh, you're talking about at this point in time, right? Okay.
Yeah. So Fnatic and then 2 other teams I consulted with by distance. And then I was just like, man, like, I spent so much time studying the game and like thinking about game theory and just I feel like the basics of this game are not that hard.
It isn't.
The basics are lane priority, numbers advantage, vision, globals, and then like how the matchups play out. You take how the matchups play out and you're like, okay, this is a pressure lane. This is a pressure lane that needs to be ganked to turn the pressure. This is one that can soak. This is one that can't soak at all. And yeah, I think that like if I spent years becoming better at draft, maybe I could draft. I think it's kind of like a card game, right? That if you learn it, you get really good at it. Like Irene, like he hasn't played in a long time, but he's like really good at draft. But I was like, I don't have the time for that because I went in my lane, which is sports psychology, and putting all the time in to become good at draft would be a waste of my skill set because I could be like meeting
and it takes away the time of doing something else. Yeah.
So I was like, so I'm just never try to become a drafter, but strategically, like now I'm working with people that I feel like have way better points than me and can teach the game to the players. But this is the first time in years where I feel like the coaches are saying stuff where the players are like, oh. And previously it was kind of like a negotiation always after the game, like, okay, what are the key points? The head coach would have some idea and the players would have some ideas, and like I would have some ideas, and we would kind of find like the most important points of the game, and then we would decide what the most optimal thing to do there would be, and then we would try to structure the game in a way that we could understand when to make which decision, and that would be how we would advance the gameplay, right? And now I'm working with Irene, one of the first coaches I've like literally just is like, you know, after the game ends, he's like there and he's thinking and he's going back and forth, and then
oh wait,
you should do this here, you should do this here, you should do this here.
Say that last sentence again. It cut off in the mic for a second.
So he's like working away at everything, and he's like getting his thoughts centered, you know, and he's like seeing the whole game in a full picture, and then like the players come over and he's like, all right, this is the main point of the game. We need to do this better, and this trade, like you can't do this, and like in the team fight, this is just mechanics, and like okay, this is just mechanics, and then this is like really bad decision, and we can't do this. You have to be here on time to this, you know. And all the players are like, wow, this is all correct. Like no disagreement. Actually, you're right, and I'm learning a lot of stuff. Awesome. So I've never had that experience. If I had that experience years ago, I probably would have like been like, yep, never going to be able to do that, because obviously I wasn't a pro player who spent years traveling around to other regions and like win with strategy.
Okay. Dorian, anything else you want to talk? Or go ahead.
Actually,
I don't
I've
know.
got an interesting angle that to throw at Weldon on this one.
I don't know.
So-
Do you agree with that statement, Loco, or do you disagree? Because I mean, I'm just saying, like, I'm just agreeing with what I said back then.
Well, I think when you made that statement that you could gameplay coach, I thought it was. I respect you for like your aspect of coaching and the things that you coach, but I think it was really presumptuous and really, kind of like a shade at all like the gameplay coaches that were there and like that actually put into work.
I mean, it's not really kind of like a shade to say that most of the coaches are bad. That's literally shade, Loco.
I was
By
literally
definition.
throwing shade. Yeah.
I mean,
He's
it was
intending to do that as well.
it was it was shade as like I'm not sure, like a D5 player, whatever, Plat 1 player saying like I can do gameplay coaching better than like the LCS coaches.
I also wanted to throw shade at them because I hoped that like I was looking at the coaches who are like they would like do scrims and then they would go and like solo queue in the evening. They would like do the same workday as the players, right? So the players would like play and scrim, and the coach would like coach, and then the day would end and they would just go off and they would like have their social lives and have their girlfriends and have their solo queue. And I'm like, you're a coach on a professional sports team. In no other sport on earth does the coach ever work less hours than the player or the same hours. You work like double the hours of the player because your job is to make the player as effective as possible, and that's what you get paid to do. And I thought it was ridiculous that all these people were getting paid money to basically have a 9 to 5 with the players, or like not really 9 to 5 because it's more like 10 to 10 p.m. But yeah, I don't know. Like I felt like it was disrespecting of them to call some of these people coaches or like head coaches, kind of disrespecting the title in a way. That what a head coach should be, where you should be in before everybody and you should like be the last one to leave and you should be grinding away all the time at something that is going to be beneficial for the team. And you should be not have an off day. When the players have an off day, you should be working. Because if you're an NCAA coach, that's what you're freaking doing. And you live that life for 20 years and you pay your dues, and that's why you get to be a head coach. It takes years to get up to that point. And it pissed me off that esports was such a young industry where people could become a head coach of like what effectively was pulling in the same salary cap nearly as like a head coach, but like just be a game analyst for a few hours a day. So that really pissed me off, and that's why I said those statements.
Loco, real talk. Yeah, go on.
I'm much nicer as a person.
Real talk, Loco.
Yeah.
In the early days when you were on TSM, you weren't like Bill Belichick, mate. You weren't up all hours of the day studying all the film and stuff. You were out partying with people. You were out seeing girls and all sorts of things. You were kind of like one of the boys as well. That was a mistake you made, right?
No, I worked more hours than the players even when I was on TSM. Even in the early days of
What
me
about
being
the
on
rest of
TSM.
that? What about the rest of what I said there, though?
What, like partying and stuff? On off days, yes. Like on off days, yes, but I still put in, as a coach, I can still say to this day, I put in more hours than anyone else. Honestly, like as a coach, I feel like I've asked people that I work with, asked people on TSM, asked people on TL, and even asked people on Golden Guardians. Like in terms of
All I'm
actually
going to say is that I've heard some other things, but I'm not saying you're a liar, mate. I don't know if the other people are telling the truth. I would imagine everyone had their own truth. In this
I'm open-minded.
Yeah, exactly. I'm open to the idea that you're good and also a shitter, Loco. So it's like a quantum super state of uncertainty with you, depending on what the day is and how I feel. So.
I'll say
How do you
this.
even come up with these analogies?
I think I'm
so applicable.
That's what I do instead of learning gameplay, mate. If I put all my time in the draft, I'd be pretty good at drafting, but Loco would just argue me anyway. So better just creatively flame him, right? It's my job on the show.
I think earlier days I was more immature and also more attention seeking. So when I did go out, I definitely did post.
Just in the earlier days, though, guys. Right? Yeah, keep going. So. He's changed a lot since then. You don't understand. He's matured a lot.
Shut up. I posted more pictures.
I am not attention seeking at all.
But tell you what, though, guys.
Sure,
starting now. I'm not going to attention seek. Starting now, right? No, okay. So yeah, go ahead. Okay, finish your point, Loco.
Oh my fucking god! Sure, I'll finish my point. I did post more picture. I posted pictures, and I was very blunt about, I'm going out, I'm hanging out with my friends than I should have been. That's probably why I got the rep as Loco goes out all the time. But in terms of like actually going out, like I didn't go out that much, and I put in so much work.
Okay. Right. The thing I was going to say earlier that I thought was like it's not even like necessarily controversial, but it's a little bit spicy because I want to do this. Okay. Weldon, here is the aspect to your rep that I don't know if you know this, but when you were describing before how you bounced around all these teams, you were on the best team, you're on the worst team, you're on the teams in between, and then teams, for example, that succeeded would have you to a certain point. Like famously, people might know a number of the teams that got to Worlds that used to use a coach didn't take you to Worlds. Like they didn't, for whatever reason, decide to go the extra step, right? So in that scenario, people from the outside are going to think, right, for whatever reason, the organization thought, we've gotten our value out of him. Like he's done what he could do, and beyond that, essentially they almost thought like the logic I thought, yeah, we've got our sports psychology training badge. We know that now. Weldon taught us that. We don't need him anymore. Well, here's the thing. I actually think in that sense, because I've talked to a lot of players that you've coached, and by the way, this is all privately, obviously. Publicly, there's very few people who are going to flame someone who actually in any way helped their career. And some of these players actually are people who've praised you publicly. But I've noticed they always praised you publicly, as in like, yeah, he helped me with some things. And like, at a certain point where I was having problems, he helped me. None of them actually, as far as I could tell, well, some of them actually did say you thought you were a good coach. But I would say it like this, right? There's two angles to it. One is that you were a victim of your own success, but you're also a victim of your own marketing. And here's how I would explain it very quickly. You're a victim of your own success in that when someone has no understanding whatsoever of what sports psychology training is, they've never looked into it at all. And in fact, they don't even know, a lot of the young cats don't even know what therapy is. They don't know the concept of talking about things is. When you come in and you talk to a player and you can see immediately, because the flaws are often very, very apparent with young people like that, you see they have some flaw like mentality or they don't interact with a teammate a certain way. If you give that guy what might actually be quite a simple technique, like, for example, it might even be something as simple as telling someone who complains a lot, like for every complaint, say 3 positive things about your teammate. Simple techniques that people have heard of before, but you have to know them and know how to apply them, right? When you tell the person that, if it is really successful very quickly, players do this classic thing, which is a really bad move, unfortunately, which is they think like, right, that was brilliant, right? What else have we got now? And then it's like every time they want a magic trick, they want a secret that they've never even heard of. That's going to blow their mind, and every week it's going to take them, the 5 or 10% up. Which obviously that's almost impossible. No one has that, and in fact, a lot of coaching, as you alluded to before, it's just going over and over again the fundamentals, perfecting those, making sure people are on track with them again. They don't let go. Like it's like keeping people. It's like that famous meme of that deer that's trying to jump out of that swimming pool and that guy's like trying to save it and then it just jumps straight back in the pool. It's like you're just doing some of that, right? And then the other factor is because publicly you marketed it this way of like, I could take these players and I could be like the catalyst to take them to the next level and stuff. Unfortunately, I think that fed back in. So a lot of these people didn't understand that the logic would be, in theory, if it works, they always need someone like you there because ideally you're there to help them when it doesn't work or when they need another technique or when they need to reiterate what they did before or what they did before doesn't work as well. The idea, I don't know whether you communicate this well, but if they'd have thought that it was less that you were giving them something which they received and more that you were like in a symbiotic relationship with them, where the two of you together produced in the Venn diagram, that was their play being better. What do you think on this angle?
So you mean like with the pro players themselves?
Yes. This is with the players themselves. Because by the way, I'll go ahead and tell you, anyone who knows the way the NALCS works, the star players have a lot of say with the ownership. And if they tell the ownership, like, yeah, he was all right, but I think we've got enough. Sometimes the owners are just going to listen, mate. So actually the players are the ones you have to win over in that sense, I think, personally.
Yeah. No, I've always understood that the players were my focus in terms of like career building. Networking is really important. But I think that like my general philosophy is to stay away from mental hacks. I came from coaching, like I was coaching traditional sport, and I went into sports psychology because I injured a player through overtraining, and he was super motivated. And then he like came one day and he was like, "Hey, doctor said I got to lay off and I can't train anymore." I was like, "What the hell? You had pain in the first place? You never even told me." And I was like, "How can you be so motivated?" Like I knew I was motivating him because he was hitting personal records. I was like, "How can you be so motivated that like you don't tell me that something is hurting?" And it was even more traumatic for me because it was basically the same area, the same injury that I was injured out of swimming with, where I had been telling my coach for like 2 years that I had this pain and he'd been ignoring it. And then, eventually I had to quit. And then a couple years later when I started retraining my swimming, I found out that it was just a really simple technique change to fix the problem that he never even cared enough to do. So I was like, that's when I went into coaching. And then when I went into sports psychology is when I to try to understand motivation and the brain. And I think that I always looked for fundamental truths and not these little like hacks that you can layer on top of, because I really hate all those productivity podcasts that are like, do this thing and like,
Sure.
like I
By
want to
the way, I'm
understand what
just saying,
really drives mental
I'm
toughness.
just saying for
So
that, by the way, that unfortunately that's what the player remembers. He
yeah,
remembers the trick, because remember, if you tell him something that's fundamentally makes sense,
so
players do that thing where they go, "I already knew that." It's like,
yep.
well, were you applying it?
So for sure, when I go to boot camps, the thing that I'm doing is all like quick wins, because
Yes, of
that's what
course.
I'm doing. Like, how do I install a system in a team with a 1 week boot camp that's going to give them success? Well, I have 2 goals when I go to boot camp. One is to help them win rapidly and like learn practices that if they keep applying will be helpful. One is to give a lot of advice to the coaches in hopes that they'll get some of the things, and another is to just give them general advice about like things that will like help them throughout their career, so that like maybe by the next season or the season after, like some of the stuff they'll remember, right? And so I have a lot of worksheets that I leave with them to try to facilitate that. But yeah, I think that most people's experience is what you describe, for sure.
Like, can you see the disconnect basically, where the player didn't see like what the benefit to the relationship was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem is how sports psychology is perceived in the first place. If you look at how
Sure.
in the 2016 Olympics, the U.S. Olympic team was using sports psychology trainers in some teams. They were embedded on the court, which is the ideal scenario, because you're working with them on like mental toughness in the moment of the play, and the psychology trainer understands the sport and can say like, they can read the body language of the player and be like, that was indicative of your mindset is wrong. You weren't aggressive enough to like take the dive. You were scared of the ball. And so like, what's your self-talk there? Like, what's going on? Okay, why is it like that? Like, you need to have this aggression or you're not going to win next year, you know? And like, the old model is everybody goes to the office once a week and talks for an hour to the guy. And that like, I was never really into that, and I don't think it's the modern way that sports psychology should be done, but it's certainly the perception that like talking somehow helps you become better at stuff, when it's not. When it's like a part of it is therapy, but
Sure.
like, I prefer on the court, which is why I've always been waiting for esport to get to the point where I can be on the court like I was with TSM, or a little bit with G2 and now with CLG. But like before, like it was just a reality situation. I think like I had to pay bills in Finland for
Well, here's the other thing
having
as
3
well.
kids, so I just had a price that meant teams could only hire me for a week.
If you just think cynically, there's also the factor that, because as I alluded to at the very beginning, most pro players hadn't even heard of the concept. Like, they didn't know what it was. A lot of people only heard of it in the context of being a magic bullet. Like, right, well, if I'm a choker, then if we get this guy in, he's going to fix that. And I always told people this, because they still do it now, Weldon. Like in CSGO, the team that was the best for the last year was Astralis, right? And they have good infrastructure, which means they have sports psychologist, dietitian, and people still talk like as though that's the reason they won all the championships. It's like, you do realize, if that really was the case, then every great sports star in history over the last 30 years, when there was like hundreds of millions of dollars poured in, would never be a choker. They would just bring in that guy, the magic bullet, and then all of a sudden, I've never thrown a pick six in the game. I always hit the last shot. No, like there's no, you can't, and that's another thing, right? You can't solve one player. Like you're trying to work with the whole team as well.
I think what you're saying would be more true if there wasn't also a skill set differential between sports psychology trainers. So some just have crappy sports psychology
that's another thing as well.
really
yes,
good ones.
Obviously you don't just you don't open the yellow pages and go, right, Alfred Adams, he's a sports psychology trainer. That's what people think. It's like, get a sports psychology trainer, dude. It's like, no, get the best one.
Yeah. So even though some athletes have had them, they've had ones that are completely ineffective. And that's partly also because sports psychology has been ineffective. One of the most hilarious studies that I try to describe to teams right away is that if you aggregate psychological skills training is what you lump everything that you kind of imagine sports psychology is together. So it's like imagery, visualization, self-talk, goal setting, all that stuff. It's called psychological skills training. There's like a new wave of sports psychology that's based, or performance psychology, let's say. It's called performance psychology, where it's all mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're kind of just like, you have something that's stressing you out and you lean into it. So you're like, I want to shot call, but I'm annoyed. I want a shot call and I'm annoyed. So lean into it. or like this is high pressure. Like I'm super stressed out, but I don't want to choke, or like, okay, I'm super stressed out and I don't want to choke, or
Yes.
but I have to clutch this. Okay, I'm super stressed out and I have to clutch this, right? So it's like you're going through the steps of just leaning into the pressure. Well, okay, so outside of that, this new wave of performance psychology training, which is only taken hold since 2004, really is when it started. You have psychological skills training, and if you bundle up all the effect size of like most of the statistical reviews of psychological skills training, it's less than 5% of performance can be explained. Like performance difference can be explained by psychological skills training.
Sure.
So it's like so ineffective as to be almost meaningless when you compare things like diet or sleep or anything else at all. So I really think that like sports psychology, for the most part, up until the last 10 years, has been mostly useful for research to understand what's happening in sport and not at all practical for improving stuff. But now that we have this new mindfulness based wave where it's about learning how to focus
Sure.
and how to focus harder and how to focus more intently with less distraction, and how to like, instead of have well balanced life, like do a little bit of this activity and this activity, have a like a healthy version of all in where you're like solely focused on one thing, but you do it in a healthy way that you don't burn out. I think that like that is what's starting to be useful, and the old school sports psychology trainers are not as effective as understanding that. They're still stuck with psychological skills training, and people who like, I don't know. I just got lucky, I feel like, because I didn't even learn any of that in school, to be honest. Most of that came after I graduated and I went to teams, and I was like, wow, this stuff is useless. I was doing it with athletes and I was like, this feels useless. It's not what I would do as an athlete. It feels like a hack, like what you described. And like I did some workshops and I was just like, I feel like I'm stealing people's money, So I tried to focus.
It works, but to a degree,
what,
right?
But I could see afterwards what stuff stuck and what didn't.
Right.
And it was really clear that there's like stuff that really is powerful.
Sure.
Like focus training, and stuff that's like whatever.
I'll give you a quick example, actually, because the funny thing is, like, I've never studied anything in this field whatsoever. Like, I've read some books that were by coaches and stuff, but I never have ever attempted to look into this field. But what you were describing there in terms of the cognitive behavioral therapy is basically, I can actually tell this story now because it's so many years later. It's not a secret or anything like. But basically, many years ago, when StarCraft 2 was the big game in esports, I actually bizarrely became friends with a player who was one of the best players, a foreign player called Nanawa, actually, from Sweden. And basically, he was a player who
so many
perfect example of someone who has incredible skill level, but whose brain is what makes them lose the game. Like he's literally like cliche of his own worst enemy. Like I've seen him
so angsty.
He would literally win matches against the same guy who was sometimes like a Korean who was considered better if it was in the group stage. And if he played the same guy in the semifinals, he would always lose them 100%. And what happened was when he was at his absolute worst in his career, when he wasn't even getting top placings anymore, was bizarrely when I actually just became friends with him purely coincidentally. I was a journalist at the time. I was going to events.
He stopped placing top because he became friends with you.
You didn't listen to the story there. Like, if you're going to try and burn someone, at least fucking execute it properly. Like, stay out of this for now. You don't know what you're doing.
Jesus.
So, like, if you listen to what I just said there, I said he was at the bottom of his career, and then I became friends with him. You see how that is? It's kind of like your career. When you were in the shitter, I was the lifeline that pulled you out. I was Jesus, you were the leper, I pulled you out. So anyway, what happened was he was at the bottom of his career, right? But it wasn't at all because of his skill level. He was still an amazing player, but he just had no clue what to do. So what I did is I said to him, literally describe to me, when you are losing a game, what happens inside your brain? Like, don't tell me what's going on in the game. I don't care that, like, he has more banelings and he built them early. No, that's irrelevant. What is going on in your brain? What are you feeling when you're losing the game? Why aren't you able to execute your skill? And he described this really insane scenario, which I've never heard of from any other player, where he said that when he knew it was the high pressure moment and he had to win this big fight, he would literally get paralyzed and he felt like electricity was shooting down his hands and he couldn't move the mouse properly. Like he would be like
that's hardcore choking.
It's insane, isn't it? It's like one of the worst examples I've ever heard. Because by the way, that's also a thing that Weldon often points out. By the way, he terms choking not as when you just play in a big game and it's like, oh, I didn't win the game. It's like it's where you literally can't do mechanically even the things that you trained and you've prepared for, and you can do every other day. So that's why it's choking. It's like the idea is, I can't get the breath out. It's like, so in this scenario, right? All I did is told him, because I'm not a coach, I don't have any history in this. I told him two things. which is this. I asked him, how do you ever get in practice to a level where you know you're amazing? And he told me, right, what I have to do is I have to go to Korea and I have to play the best players. And then when I get 75% win rate on the ladder, I know I'm good. And then I go to the West and I know I'm going to smash everyone, right? I said, okay, let's take that, put it in the back pocket a second. And then the other detail, when you're losing, you have this moment, right, where you start getting all the electricity and all the. I said, but ignore the physical aspect, right? Assuming that was, I would imagine some psychological component. But I said, ignore the physical component, right? What are you thinking while that's going on? And he said, well, what I'm thinking is I should be able to make a better move than this. I wouldn't even be in this position if I'd have just done something earlier. Why did I even start out the game that way? I've given him an advantage. So I said, right, there's two things you do. One is you have to go to Korea as often as you can. And so he was like, well, I already do that, but the problem is when you go to the West and you play all the tournaments and you come back to Korea, you always start terrible because your level goes down compared to the Koreans, right? So you'll start at 40% win rate. So what happens is your confidence is shot completely. And by the way, it's a very small side note. That is why most Westerners didn't go for extended boot camps in Korea, because they would go there, lose most of the games and go, this is bullshit, I'm getting worse, and then go back to the West and have a 90% win rate again. So first of all, I told him, all you're going to think to yourself is when you go there and you have the 40% win rate, you think to yourself, good, I always have to start at 40% or a bad win rate because that's how I get to 50%. And then I know that in time, I eventually get to the 75%. So it's actually good that I've started a bad spot because it's like I'm beginning the game, I'm leveling up. So first of all, he did that and that was helping. And then the second detail, this I think was the core thing that actually helped this guy, was I just told him, you know what? Maybe you're just unlucky, mate. Maybe you actually are the only person in history who gets electrical shocks in their body when you're in pressure situations. So now that we know that, no point complaining about it. Instead, what I want you to do is when you get the electrical shocks, don't think oh, I made a bad mistake there. I could be doing a better move now. All I want you to think is this. In that moment right now, if I paused the game and said, is there anything you can do that's the correct decision that would give you a chance to win? Do it in that moment, right? And that's all I did. I never went to events with him, never did anything more. I'm not exaggerating. Literally a month after I had this conversation with him and he applied it in his Korean boot camp. That next year, I think he had 4 or 5 top 4 placings. It was ridiculous. And the whole point there, by the way, is I didn't do that. I just gave him a little tip and he actually applied it himself. But you can see how it's insane really how other people don't have any of that stuff. This is 2013 or something, Weldon. No one had any of that and it's ridiculous.
Okay, so this is actually a really insane coincidence. I was watching Naniwa at a European, I think it was Intel Extreme Masters event, but it might have just been a German LAN. I was watching him.
Give me the circumstance, I could probably tell you it.
He was in the finals and he was up 2 games or 3 games in a best of 7 and he got reverse swept by a Korean.
It was in the MLG Providence final at the end of 2011. He lost to Lenok, who he'd come from the upper bracket and then yeah, you're right. He was on the brink of winning and they lost it all.
Yeah, and it was in front of I think it was in front of a couple hundred people or maybe
big crowd, yeah, at the time.
At the time, and he broke down, physically broke down in the booth, he was shaking and
yes.
Frozen and crying and he lost the match and so I was watching this live at the time and I had just discovered esport because I had just basically gotten to the point where I couldn't play StarCraft 2 anymore because I was busy with a baby, and so I was oh, I can watch StarCraft 2, awesome, fantastic. So then I could watch people even better than me, and I saw him in this breakdown moment, and there was no coach that walked up to him and put his arm around him and started explaining to him what happened and helping him take this tragic loss and turn it into the next game. And I was there's no coaches in esport. There's no coaches in esport, and that's when all of this started. Was that exact moment.
Dude,
well, the thing is, there weren't Weldon. There were just people who either were a manager or later gameplay people like Loco.
And that's when that's literally when I just made the decision that I needed to go become an esport coach instead of a youth sports coach, which is what I was doing and where my career track was on at the time.
Damn, there's another insane coincidence. Insane coincidence. So after Doran,
If you want to snort cocaine off Nanoaz.
no.
Loco's like, I gotta upstage them.
No,
What do
no.
I do?
No, come on. This is just local start. Here's the thing. I
There-
already tell you about.
There's another.
Later,
No,
I was wearing a red T-shirt.
no, it's
Hold on,
insane. It's
listen.
insane. Wait, let me tell my story.
Listen. We're both going to listen to his story, okay? We're going to give him a fair try here, right? But I'm just saying, he does have a habit of coming in with a straight fire story that kills the mood. So, Loco, the floor is yours, my friend.
You were like, can't you do it?
Yeah,
and then he
look.
was like, here's my flame, and you were, and
know.
everybody
No.
was, the chat was just
know.
like,
Here's my insane
He
story.
tries. He
No,
tries.
here's my insane story. So Weldon watched Naniwa cry, and then Doran helped Naniwa get better. And then after that, do you know what team Naniwa went to go to Korea
Startail,
to
which
practice
we were on
with
the
it?
League of Legends team.
Startail, and I was on Startail, and Naniwa didn't have that many Korean friends and didn't have that many foreigner friends because he was an asshole to everyone.
Okay.
So Doran was able to fix his problem of finally getting past to round of 4 and making semis. And I remember just screaming, and one day Naniwa fucking comes up to me and yells at me, I made semifinals! And I was like, grats. And then he paid for drinks that night. So it started with Weldon watching Naniwa cry, and then
Yeah.
Doran helping Naniwa out of his shithole. And then it ended with Naniwa finally making semis and buying me drinks for that night. We had chimek, chicken and beer.
Right, you know what? Let's just be kind and say, like, yeah, that's a brilliant story as well.
That
you were integral to the whole
basically,
process.
Naniwa is like
I
the
know.
origin nexus of like modern esports.
Yes,
is what,
he
what
is
I'm saying.
unknowingly. Yeah. If
Yeah,
it wasn't for him,
it's
where would we
insane.
all be?
we came full circle.
Who was that other Liquid player who was like really toxic?
Yellow?
and
Oh,
insane?
Hyuk.
No.
Not Darian.
Idra.
Crazy one. Idra, yeah.
No, that was Evil Geniuses.
Oh, he was that right? He was on Evil
Yes,
Genius.
yes.
Sorry.
But he also had similar problems, actually, funnily enough. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the end of the show. Pretty good note to end on.
Man,
That was
dude,
very cathartic.
it would have been perfect if I just told my story where I was like, oh, I have another insane coincidence. And obviously, it's a sarcasm, but you set me up to fail, Doran. That was not good sports psychology
You know what,
training.
Loco? I wasn't actually aware you had sarcasm in your bag. So I'm impressed. I'm proud of you for the growth. And I hope to see this sarcasm that you've developed in future episodes of Listening.
Now that I've lived through one of these shows, I feel like I see what you're basically trying to like bequeath the baby of your knowledge to like Loco, like it rubs off on you
Yeah.
during the shows, and like he can like learn marketing and brand
Of
building
course.
and
Yeah.
like witty comebacks and how to like navigate an interview.
I pretend I'm talking to the public, but really, it's really just like Pygmalion but with Locodoco.
Mentoring with
Yeah,
Thorin.
exactly.
It's not listening to Loco.
It's
No,
My
there-
Fair Lady with Locodoco.
There's one point when in the show.
My Fair
where-
Loco. There we go. That's the title of the episode. My Fair Loco.
No, there was one point in the show where we were talking to Weldon, and then it was about like doing something spicy, and then Weldon basically told a story about my weakness is I motivate people too much, where I motivated this guy to injure himself, and then someone typed in the chat like, this is what you want to say when an employer asks you what your weakness is, and I was like, holy shit, this is Weldon, like this is Weldon at his finest.
No, that's the old move, isn't it? It's like what would you say?
My weakness is like it's like
Yeah,
Dark
my
Shadow. It's like my
flaws-
weakness is I'm too good.
I just care too
People-
much.
I
if
outthink
anything.
myself.
Yeah, And the problem with me is I can't give up trying to win. I've got a champion in my DNA. It's a flaw, but I'm working hard on it.
It's like it's what you read on the internet. Like, tell your employer like your weakness is your biggest strength. Like, I motivated this guy too much. It was just too much. My motivation skills were too good that he injured himself due to the motivation.
It is hilarious. It's but honestly, it was super not tragic. It was traumatizing for me because it was exactly the same injury that I had that put me out of swimming. And I was like, I literally became a swim coach with the chip on my shoulder to become better than my previous shitter coach that had like ruined my career. And I was like, I will crush him.
Okay.
I will like become the best swimming coach in the world, and I will like make sure, and I'll go to that school and I will take his job, And then
Well,
that was my motivation. And then I was going along, and I was like 3 years in, and I was like having some success. I was getting some national level swimmers, and then he comes up with the same injury, and I'm like, oh my god, I am him. I literally just, I am that coach, and I had a crisis of faith.
You know what the real irony of the
Europe.
story is, though? is that when you said that actually when you had the guy under you who had the same problem, all he needed to do to fix it actually was just like, change his stroke or something, change the technique. So basically, he just had to change a fundamental aspect to be more in line with like how it's properly done.
Which I
That's
didn't.
That is the ultimate irony, dude, because that's what exactly my point that I was making before. That actually the most help you can usually give people as a coach is like that, is helping them develop their fundamentals to a high level. Because I'll tell you a very, very quick example of this. That actually, funnily enough, you can use this if you want in your bag of how like talent doesn't exist. Because if you asked someone, Weldon, who the most talented shooter in the history of the NBA is, everyone's going to say Steph Curry, right? Because like literally the numbers are like impossible for what he's able to do. Like the percentage of shots he's taken is ridiculous compared to everyone, but he's hitting like basically among the highest percentages on the largest volume. He's like the whole reason the entire NBA changed to being like volume 3-point shooting. And this is the mad detail a lot of people don't know. Because his dad was a very good 3-point shooter back in the day when you just took it as a set shot. He took like 3 of them a game, People think, right, that's proof of talent. He just got his dad's talent, and his dad probably helped him, and he got to be amazing, right? Here's the detail people don't know. There's a story where supposedly, I think it was after high school, Steph Curry actually wasn't as good a shooter as he is now, and his dad said to him, your form when you shoot actually isn't good enough. Like you don't have like the ideal shooting form. So over the summer, they literally took his whole shooting arc apart and rebuilt it to be like, in theory, the ideal shot. What it is now, it's actually one of the best quick release shots. Like he does it basically like picture perfect. The arc on it's the best, so you have the best chance of the ball going in. And here's the mad thing: he even says it actually set him back, because then when he went to all these like summer camps and like trying to get into college and stuff, everyone thought he was shit, and they were like, "Oh, this guy's terrible," etc. But if he hadn't have literally gone back to square one and just worked on the basics, that's how he became the best shooter ever in the history of the NBA. Not bad, eh?
We'll end on that.
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Fundamentals.
Cool. Weldon, Thorin, thanks for doing the show. Woo.